Chapter 796. Since it couldn't be shaken, a counterforce followed. Compared to a physical shock wave, a psychological shock wave would explode much earlier. Extraordinary. In Gong Qi's eyes, the greenish-gray color that seemed to be sealed in ice cracked. At this moment, the colors and luminosity in front of his eyes rapidly changed. The hole in the rock formation that had just been pierced through was originally colored by the flames and dark clouds. Now, a pure and dazzling light gathered, like the muzzle of a giant spaceship that was accumulating energy and waiting to fire. Dazzling light waves also leaped out from the depths of the distorted cracks. However, there were no signs of leakage. All there was seemingly infinite convergence, binding, and compression. The top of the cloud pillar that was about to smash into the rock formation directly collapsed. The newly constructed region of laws at the entrance of the hole wasn't big, but it was so solid that it left one in despair. And it was precisely this solid strength that had firmly locked onto Gong Qi's location within the greenish-gray cloud pillar. It was unwavering and unwavering. In an instant, the offensive and defensive positions switched. Gong Qi, who had already grasped the absolute initiative, suddenly became the hunting target of others. F***CK. Amidst Gong Qi's rare curse, the greenish-gray cumulonimbus cloud that was like a towering cliff suddenly collapsed, and the illusory cloud scattered in all directions. A portion of it quickly evaporated under the high temperature and pressure of the Blood Soul Temple's domain, but most of it settled and expanded, occupying more areas. It also projected Gong Qi's unique laws into a wider range. In that instant, the temperature of the Blood Soul Temple domain dropped as a whole. Gong Qi's laws formed sufficient interference. Even though it was still far from achieving its goal of suppression, it still gave Gong Qi a chance to move in an extremely short period of time. With a hum, the clouds in the area where Gong Qi was trembled. His spirit body fluctuated with the tremors before turning incorporeal. Almost at the same time, the ionization channel structure was completed. A dazzling electric dragon rumbled down, completely evaporating the clouds and the corresponding laws where Gong Qi was. The air, already distorted under the high temperature and pressure, no longer had the ability to expand or make a sound. It looked like a frozen scene, but it was still shocking. There was no doubt that it was an extraordinary level technique. Gong Qi's figure appeared 50 meters away. At that critical moment, he had relied on the interference of the cloud's laws and the corresponding teleportation technique to escape. However, he did not relax in the slightest. There was only unresolvable fear in his heart. Who's that over there? The abyssal zone was sturdy and stable, so it was definitely a psychic. Not to mention, it was the electromagnetic field with the widest range of interference. It seemed like there was no such person in the inner plane. It couldn't be the government or the military, right? Before he could react, another surprise attack came. Behind Gong Qi, Madame Halder followed the strange gravitational pull of the net frame and caught onto Gong Qi's teleportation destination. She silently arrived, and a blood-red light pierced through. Get lost. With a low shout, Gong Qi forcefully pushed back the blood light that had pounced at him. This was an unfair collision. Amidst the chaotic blood light, Madame Halder was no longer even recognizable as a human. But that incorporeal blade was accompanied by a mocking laugh. It was as if it had been smeared with corrosive poison, and it stabbed right into his heart. The taste of fear is actually not bad. Gong Qi seemed to have suffered another heavy punch. In his spirit-body state, he had abandoned most of his useless physiological emotions, like a dried-up river. But at this moment, the stimulation from the explosion had replaced the transmission of neurotransmitters with an even more direct psychic wave current. It had created an even more tragic wound and crack. He had just finished mentally preparing himself and reconstructed his analysis of the situation and corresponding strategies. The heavy punch that came smashing at him didn't just smash his face, it also smashed the foundation of his survival. His mind was in a daze. At this moment, the long scar left by the lightning dragon was still lingering in the clouds, and the light waves in the cracks in the rock stratum had already begun to gather for the second time. His attention was inevitably drawn to it. If the lightning cannons above his head were to fire continuously, and each strike had the same might as the one just now. Oh no! Signs of danger suddenly appeared. It didn't come from the cannons above him, but from the trajectory of the lightning dragon. Just as the lightning intersected with the lava at the bottom, a figure suddenly burst out. Taking advantage of the gap in Gong Qi's absent-minded state, the figure instantly crushed through the domain space that was still trembling and arrived with a loud bang. There really was a cannonball in the lightning cannon that had just been fired. Gong Qi had avoided the first attack, but he ultimately couldn't avoid the second. The threat came suddenly and fiercely. The tyrannical rule interference distorted and destroyed Gong Qi's mental sensing network. He could capture the other party's momentum, but he couldn't further analyze it. He instinctively wanted to teleport far away again, but the surrounding turbulent rule environment didn't give him the chance. Helplessly, the green-gray light around his body flickered and extinguished. He gathered the clouds and forcefully constructed the rule to form a sturdy barrier. However, the barrier had just formed when it was forcefully blasted apart. An arm wrapped in metal armor, similarly wrapped in dazzling lightning, blasted toward him. Physical side. His initial judgment was instantly overturned. They were both electromagnetic directions, but how could the mental side and physical side be the same? Especially in his haste, the other party had actually closed in on him. The tyrannical qi and blood in his body rushed back to the abyss area, forming the most troublesome interference field. If his foundation in the abyss area was still intact, he could still forcefully pull it up to a higher level and move toward the polar domain to obtain space to move around. But now that his foundation was destroyed, he would be a beat slower even if he were to improvise during normal times. How could he engage in close combat? Gong Qi's heart palpitated. Almost at the same time, the lightning fist struck his face. The structure of his spirit body collapsed with a hum, and then it entangled with the green-gray essence energy around him. It was as if a gale had swept through the clouds and dispersed in all directions. This was thanks to Gong Qi's out-of-body state, which allowed him to disperse so easily and avoid the frontal attack. But the person who punched didn't make a sound. He slightly retracted his fist, and his body wrapped in exoskeleton armor spun along with the momentum of the fist. It was precisely this spin that instantly transformed the violent impact into a fist stance that was ready to be launched. It could be withdrawn at will, and its rotation was in no way weaker than Gong Qi's in his spirit body state. In particular, the electric current that leaped around his body supported a strong electromagnetic field on the physical plane, and achieved a storm-like disturbance on the mental plane. This kind of switch between offense and defense, as well as powerful control of the field, reflected the stance of a top-notch expert. It was also because of this that Gong Qi couldn't help but expend a bit more effort to reassemble his spirit body. Instead, a certain name naturally flickered in his mind, and then it was shot out. Jin Tong. In Gong Qi's memory, there was only one extraordinaire who could control electromagnetic power by his side. Once he was alarmed, that familiar aura imprint was also peeled off from the outer shell of the exoskeleton armor and the strange skin membrane. It was reflected in his mind, and there was no doubt about it. Gong Qi's furious thoughts swept through the void, but it didn't trigger any additional reactions. The other party locked onto Gong Qi's spirit body again, and without a word, launched another round of violent attacks. Gong Qi's spirit body structure was once again destroyed with 2 or 3 punches. Jin Tong, you're King crazy. From what Gong Qi knew, Jin Tong was a top-notch wilderness hunter. The metal hunting group under him was quite powerful, and at the same time, he had a long-term cooperative relationship with the Ability User Association. After all, the association was the largest distributor of mutant resources in the inner world. Jin Tong's team's annual transactions with the association were in the hundreds of millions, and they involved quite a lot of premium products. To the other party, they were both important clients. With such a background, Gong Qi and Jin Tong naturally had a friendship. Even if they weren't best buddies, they still had contact every year. But what the hell was with the current situation? Gong Qi's mind was in turmoil. Countless thoughts rose and fell, combining into thousands of conspiracy possibilities. Like the shadows of trees swaying in the dark night, they unfolded in his heart. He knew that his condition was terrible, but he couldn't calm down for a moment. In just a few flashes of thought, his spirit-body structure was once again destroyed. This time, it wasn't because he was actively disintegrating the force, but because it had really been smashed apart by the heavy punch. Gong-chi was really injured. Even though his spirit body was immune to attacks on the material plane, and he had a partial advantage over the fleshly body, this was still unable to completely dissolve Jin Tong's tyrannical blood energy. At the same time, his mental defenses, which had been damaged and then reconstructed, collapsed yet another corner. Countless invisible cracks spread out. This couldn't continue. This absolutely couldn't continue. Gong-chi still didn't understand why Jin Tong would stand by Luo Nan's side. Furthermore, Jin Tong had used the exoskeleton armor to hide his head but show his tail. Perhaps this was an unsolvable riddle. And the more realistic problem was that he had already completely lost the initiative after making consecutive misjudgments. Jin Tong was pressuring him at close range. Jin Tong's powerful fighting style, berserk attacks, and meticulous control of the field, was even stronger than what Gong-chi knew. Jin Tong's state was clearly at its peak, and Jin Tong didn't give Gong-chi a chance to catch his breath. With Gong-chi's current half-crippled state, Gong-chi would probably be forcefully ground to death if things continued like this. Screw you. In this desperate situation, Gong-chi's greenish-gray pupils cracked like a layer of ice before shattering with a bang. In this moment, he completely abandoned the structure of his spirit body. He fused with his essence energy that had been tempered 1,000 times to form a haze of light that was half illusory and incorporeal. He forcefully invaded the lightning that coiled around Jin Tong's body. Gong-chi didn't disperse the structure of his spirit body to unload the force. Instead, he wanted to fight Jin Tong on a more detailed, more microscopic level. He wanted to crazily strangle Jin Tong. And the consumption that came from this would increase by several times, dozens of times. It was even possible that the core of Jin Tong's spirit body would be damaged. There would be no end to future troubles. His life was gone. Who cared about future troubles? Mrs. Halder controlled her bloody light to stop on the outskirts. She originally wanted to quietly cut in and seize some of the spoils of battle. But the situation entered the most intense level in the first instant. The blazing white lightning and the greenish-gray essence energy permeated and counter-permeated. They resisted and countered, stirring up a dark ring of fire. It noiselessly tore apart the domain of the Blood-Soul Temple, isolating a deadly environment. Anyone who tried to force their way in would become the venting point for the clashing forces of two extraordinaries. They would suffer double the damage. She didn't have any chance to intervene. She could only drag her ruined body, quietly sense and wait. One of her eyes had already been blasted apart under the continuous clashes. The crystal had evaporated, but her mind's eye was clear and penetrating. Luo Nan's framework served as a probing needle, and it pierced straight into the depths of the enemy's heart. Gong-chi was truly going all out. He displayed an unprecedented decisiveness. The greenish-gray essence energy was like leaping icy flames within the area where he and Jin Tong fought. It possessed a water-like penetrative power, but it also contained a violent destructive power. The lightning that Jin Tong controlled had already interweaved into a net, but now this net began to warp violently. From time to time, the knots of the net would collapse, the lines would reconnect, and then the net would be reconstructed. The cycle continued. But Gong-chi was terrified. His mental defenses were damaged, reconstructed, and broken. The scars had already been deeply branded into the deepest recesses of his will. He was able to be this decisive right now because the cracks that had opened up were gushing flames of fury. They formed an explosive driving force. Fear and fury were two sides of the same coin. They could switch at any time. How long could Gong-chi last? Under the eruption of near uncontrollable power, under the suction of the framework net. Oh. Mrs. Halder furrowed her brows slightly. Within the dark ring of fire where the extraordinaries fought, a strange colored flame suddenly flickered. It came from Jin Tong's body, which had been as steady as a mountain. It was the exoskeleton armor wrapped around his body. A layer of flame had burned through it, leaving behind shallow scorch marks and ashes. And in the area where the flame had yet to burn out, the fascia-like foreign body that was wrapped around him was only an insignificant amount. It was still twitching under the roasting, as if it was alive. Tisk. Mrs. Halder could clearly hear someone smacking his tongue in annoyance. Gong Chi, who was within the ring of battle, felt it more directly. The pressure from Jean Tong's side suddenly dropped, and an inconceivable break appeared in the tempestuous rhythm of attacks. A chance. Gong Chi's thoughts had already fallen far behind his instinctive reactions in this moment where the rules and energy interweaved. He made the most correct action in an instant. The greenish-gray essence energy instantly converged. Its light and color were purified to the point of being nearly transparent. At the same time, it was tempered to a sharpness that exceeded the limits of its limits. It also possessed a dark damage that could corrode the soul. Under the guidance of the energy, it seized the break point that shouldn't have appeared and pierced straight in. The sharp essence energy spear directly pierced into the center of the exoskeleton armor's visor. It pierced through 2 layers of metal armor and the flesh and blood in the middle. It went forward and out, completely penetrating through. It hit. At this moment, Gong Chi was somewhat at a loss. It wasn't easy for his lagging thoughts to catch up, but an irrelevant thought appeared in his mind. He remembered that Jean Tong was too casual when it came to controlling electromagnetic energy. He also had the special ability to transform his body into metal. The two complemented each other and were enough to support a complete system of rules. Therefore, he didn't really like it or was very good at cooperating with exoskeleton armor. It was also very difficult for there to be a vehicle in the world that was suitable for him to carry his extraordinary strength. Is this guy in front of me really Jean Tong? The sudden reversal of the situation also reversed the direction of the power. Gong Chi's attack caused the deadlock between the two to lose balance, and it poured out in the direction of the weaker side. The strength of the exoskeleton armor structure couldn't withstand this level of impact. In the blink of an eye, it twisted and collapsed. Of course, the first to collapse was the visor that had suffered a direct hit. A strange bloody light seeped out. Gong Chi's senses pierced through the broken metal outer shell and the strange bloody light. He locked onto the distorted face that still gave him a familiar feeling. Jean Tong. No, it wasn't. At least not at certain times. In the bloody light, a blurry face that was still pierced by the essence chi spear was melting. Jean Tong's facial features reappeared, like a clay work that had been pinched. But just as this face was formed, it distorted and melted away. The blurry face from before replaced it, bringing with it an indescribable familiarity and unfamiliarity. Then, it distorted, melted, replaced, and the cycle repeated. That's my face? Rumble. Gong Chi's thoughts suddenly left the established track. Amidst the rumbling sounds, he seemed to have crashed off a cliff, tumbling and struggling in the void. It was precisely because of this that he didn't notice that Lady Halder, who had been waiting outside for a long time, had once again controlled the bloody light and silently charged forward. Gong Chi fell into a state of uncontrollable thinking. There were many things he understood, but there were still many things he didn't understand. But no matter what, that turbid and malevolent truth that contained great cruelty and great terror smashed into the depths of his heart, transforming into a demonic claw that fiercely clawed at him. The front of the essence chi was still in front of him. That incomparably familiar face was trembling and stirring. Even if it was a living person, even if it was a transcendent, 99% of them would still die. Lady Halder's aura was rapidly weakening, but Gong Chi was also rapidly weakening. This was a weakening of the spiritual plane, to the point of collapse. The barrier of will shattered with a rumble. His emotions were like an erupting volcano, exploding with destructive flames and emitting a sharp howl in the chaotic spiritual world. Lady Halder closed in, and the bloody light pierced into the depths of the azure-gray essence chi that had just gathered. But in the next moment, the azure-gray light exploded outwards. Freezing and exploding, two completely different types of killing power simultaneously struck Lady Halder's body. The bloody light condensed and then exploded. Lady Halder's already badly damaged body seemed to have been stripped of all flesh and blood. All that was left was a twisted skeleton that was still burning fiercely. But it was this twisted burning skeleton that firmly absorbed the azure gray essence chi in front of it. It was as if it had been smeared with superglue, or perhaps it had been thoroughly magnetized. Deputy Secretary General Gong, you don't have a chance anymore. The repeated declaration was like a poisoned blade that pierced through him a second time. Gong Chi roared. He wanted to tear apart Lady Halder, who was twisting around him. At the same time, he wanted to tear apart the rapidly weakening, but still tenaciously existing nightmarish face. But, he was also weakening. At the core of his spiritual body, a shadow of nothingness was rapidly spreading out. It was like a plant that devoured flesh and blood. After growing stronger in secret, it would reveal its malevolent face and openly inject poison into his blood, carrying out a terrifying transformation. Behind the fury was fear. After 2 violent struggles, Gong Chi was still unable to break free from Lady Halder, nor was he able to resist the swallowing of the shadow at the bottom of his heart. Then, his emotions would naturally overturn, and a cold wind of fear would blow into the cracks in his collapsed heart. It was quite ironic that his thoughts returned at this moment. Gong Chi completely understood. His opponent's main direction of attack had never been the suppression of the Blood Soul Temple's domain. It wasn't Lady Halder. It wasn't the extraordinary that had driven him mad. His opponent had been corroding his mind from beginning to end, injecting a fatal poison into the depths of his heart. This was similar to the methods of the Darksider species. It was the ultimate move that the apex masters of the mind were proficient in. Luo Nan was a master of the mind. Gong Chi suddenly stirred. This was the first time he had given the youth a clear position. Seeing his opponent clearly was tantamount to seeing himself clearly. In his daze, he seemed to have grasped a thread of hope. Although Luo Nan held the upper hand, he had used all his trump cards. He had no backup plans. This place wasn't far from Spring City. Right now, 2 great combat powers were tangling with him. The Blood Soul Temple's domain had ruptured open during the battle. It was hard to isolate the inside from the outside. Even if he couldn't teleport away, he just needed to slow down and drag out the deadlock. The aura of an extraordinary would most likely be able to attract the attention of others. If the ground shook. It was as if a drum was heavily pounding on his chest. The lava cavern was shaking. The source of the shaking came from the turbulence of the structure of the void. Gray mist was seeping in from a certain part of the broken domain of the Blood Soul Temple. The crack that the Blood Soul ants had pierced through and fixed in place. It was clearly only wisps, but the moment it seeped in, the high temperature and pressure of the infernal inferno was smeared with a layer of indescribable gray matter. The luminosity of the entire lava cavern suddenly dimmed. Gong Chi's mind trembled. This was because he was certain that these wisps of gray mist came from the mist maze he had just escaped from not too long ago. This wasn't mist. It was a domain fragment. It was a space-time structural element that was refined to the extreme. The change in luminosity of the lava cavern only proved one thing: these refined space-time components were rapidly infiltrating and fusing with the domain of the Blood Soul Temple. There were practically no conflicts at all in this grand and complex project that made one's scalp go numb. Even if there were, they would be adjusted at an inconceivable speed. This series of processes looked like scribbles that were casually drawn, but the final result was clearly the most exquisite of meticulous paintings. In terms of the construction of space-time, this was a gap that made one despair. And what was even more despairing was that the gap in the domain that had just been exposed had already been completely mended in the time of a few breaths. Its tenacity was even greater than before. Could it be that he had to be called a space-time master in addition to a spiritual master? Gong Chi's spiritual senses wandered around blankly. In the depths of his mind, a shadow that was like a moldy and rotten lump continued to expand. Perhaps it was because he had assimilated to a certain level, but for the first time, he clearly captured that invisible towering frame net. His mind probed and was immediately enveloped by a blazing light. The sun, the seemingly familiar sun of the abyss. In the dark and boundless deep sky, the sun sat in the center. Spider webs weaved densely and bloody light flowed. That was the frequent exchange and transformation of vitality and origin energy. A considerable portion of it came from his body. At this moment, Gong Qi was clearly a mosquito that had been tied up into a cocoon. Countless spider webs entangled him and countless nodes were digested. There was no chance or hope for him. Ha, ha, ha. Gong Qi suddenly let out another roar. The scene of the spiritual world collapsed amidst the roar and he returned to the plane of reality. Before his eyes was a dark red space. It was the embryonic form of some domain. The local spacetime, the domain of the Blood Soul Temple, and the domain fragment of the Misty Labyrinth. If these three structures completely converged and fused together, this would be the extraordinary domain. It would not be an exaggeration to call Luo Nan a spacetime master at that time. But right now, he was still a bit short. The crux of the matter lay in the fact that no powerful person in the world could evolve into a domain with just a strand of thought. This proved that Luo Nan, the psychic and spacetime genius, was here. Perhaps he had just arrived, or perhaps he had been hiding here for a long time. In any case, the youth was here. He was within the range of his attack and slaughter. Ever since the battle began, Gong Qi's mind had never been this clear and this focused. Death was a foregone conclusion, and the final hindrance vanished in a puff of smoke. His extraordinary level mental senses radiated the most penetrating rays of light, illuminating this extremely vast yet imperfect void. Then Gong Qi caught a glimpse of a figure. That figure should also be in a spirit-body state. A sharp howl rang out, and the green-gray essence energy instantly ignited and purified. It was just like how it pierced through the extraordinary body. It burned with hatred and fury, tempered into the sharpest of spears and swords, and shot across the sky. Die. Gong Qi had already exhausted everything he had in this fearless attack, including the teleportation technique that he had been unable to use due to the interference of the domain. Thus, he erased practically all of the distance between them. The spear and sword of essence energy had already arrived in front of the target's face. The abyssal region, no, an even higher region, operated marvelously. The spirit-body figure that originally existed in the world suddenly rose to a higher level, taking a step upwards. This step was from the real to the virtual. This step was beyond the reach of his strength. Gong Qi burst forth with another howl, and at this moment, he suddenly saw a pair of unfamiliar and cold eyes. The eyes were extremely close, yet they were very far away. It was loathsome. Gong Qi instinctively wanted to destroy these eyes, but in this instant, it was as if he had fallen into a long, winding river. He went against the waves and struggled forward, but he was swept even further away by the torrent of water. The ice-cold waves washed over him, taking away his energy and vitality, taking away his life force and spiritual light, taking away his emotions and thoughts, taking away everything that should be a life. All that was left was old, decaying, and other worthless things. Gong Qi howled and struggled forward. Finally, he saw a slightly familiar face. It was one of his most profound memories before he fell into the cloud world. It was the girl who attracted him to Xia City, the girl who was worth 2,000 of the shares of the Deep Blue Project. He did not know that his thoughts and the corresponding state of mind formed a nearly perfect mirror image of Jin Tong, who had fiercely fought him before his death. Chapter 797. May 3, 2097, 3:00 a.m. Yin Lo lowered her head once more. She looked at the exquisite lady's wristwatch on her wrist and confirmed the time. The living area on the lower deck was perfectly soundproof. It was quiet and still. The main light in the small living room between the rooms was never turned on, but the orange night light was on. It interweaved with the soft light of the projection work area, illuminating the corners, the floor, and the silhouette of a person who had been asleep for a long time on the sofa. Or rather, an empty shell. In the past 10 hours, there was practically no change in this area aside from the adjustment of the lighting. Compared to the material plane, the result of the perception on the mental plane was the complete opposite. This was especially true for the vibrations that originated from the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District. It was nearly the same time as Luo Nan's slumber. It had never stopped since the beginning. There were even a few periods where the vibrations were so intense that it seemed as if they would collapse in the next moment. It nearly jolted Yin Li's heart out of her chest. Throbbing, anxious, and fearful emotions followed her like a shadow. Even so, she still had to force herself to remain calm. She did her best to pacify the upper echelons of the order who didn't know what was going on. She wanted to prevent them from muddle-headedly doing stupid things. Fine. In fact, her so-called knowing was nothing more than a half-assed explanation. She could only passively wait on the yacht right now. A few minutes ago, the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District had just passed through an intense period. Right now, the operating momentum was very calm. Yin Li let out a sigh of relief for the time being. She diverted some of her attention to look at the psychic diagram that had appeared on the projection work area for a long time. Perhaps it was a misconception caused by the long period of observation. She felt that this scene of a tornado on the sea gave her a strange feeling of unfamiliarity. It was like looking at a word for a long time and suddenly not being able to recognize it. At this time, the sound of static came from the built-in headphones. The captain of the yacht took the initiative to contact her. "Manager Yin, there's a situation. The hull has suddenly become heavy." Yin Li didn't understand for a moment. "What did you say?" "The hull's draft is increasing. It's like 10 tons of cargo being smashed. It's already exceeded the design draft, but it's still going on. It's not far from the upper limit of the structure's draft. We may have fallen into a trap." The captain had just retired from the army not long ago. His words carried the air of a bandit. In fact, the sound of a gun being pulled rang out from the other side. Clearly, the crew area was already nervous. Yin Li's heart was tense, but the situation she faced was much more complicated than the captain's considerations. How could she make a decision so easily? Just as his scalp swelled with pain, a faint sound came from the side of the sofa. It seemed to be Luo Nan making a sound from his nostrils. Yin Li couldn't see too clearly, but she could feel that Luo Nan had woken up. His eyelids were moving, opening a sliver, but he hadn't completely lifted his head. It was like waking up after a long sleep. Half of his consciousness was still in a dream. Yin Li was stunned for a moment before ecstasy surged in her heart. At this moment, the hull of the ship shook slightly, and the originally well-soundproof living area could also hear the roar of coughing coming from the stern of the ship. The ray yacht cruising on the surface of the lake suddenly slowed down. Those with keen senses like Yin Li could even feel the yacht sinking. Clearly, the situation reported by the captain was getting worse. It was at this time that Luo Nan opened his eyes. Yin Li noticed that the color of Luo Nan's pupils was a bit strange. At first, there was a layer of gray, and then a dark red color. But as his eyelids blinked, these miscellaneous colors quickly faded away and were replaced by a bright light. It seemed to be brighter than the light source in the room, so much so that the projection work area was dimmed. Sir. Yin Li subconsciously felt that something was wrong and called out to them. Luo Nan, who was on the sofa, clearly heard her and turned his head. But the air in the small living room let out a cracking sound following his movements. It was as if the ropes were unable to bear the burden and broke apart. In this instant, Yin Li felt as if she had been pushed hard by someone. She staggered back and fell onto the stairs that she had entered from. And she was clearly lucky, because the sofa in front of her, which was carrying Luo Nan, had crumbled. The surrounding coffee table and even the bar further away had twisted and deformed. It was as if they had been smashed by a heavy hammer. Even the bottom of the cabin had collapsed. But Luo Nan still maintained a relaxed sitting posture under such an unforeseen event. Even though the bottom of his body was already a hole in the bottom of the cabin that had collapsed. Luo Nan's state was indeed relaxed. There was clearly some sort of invisible force carrying him. It didn't seem like he had been ambushed. Then perhaps it would be more appropriate to call him the initiator? Manager Yin. Manager Yin. The captain shouted loudly. Clearly, he had discovered the unforeseen event in the living area. Lu just sat on the stairs. She was unable to understand the current situation, so it was hard for her to give a response. Luo Nan, who was sitting calmly, even had the leisure to fiddle with the work area in front of him. This virtual projection was probably the only thing that remained unchanged aside from him. Then he turned his face once more and smiled at the nearby Lu. Tidy up a bit. While he was speaking, a hole burst open in the wall behind Luo Nan from the distortion of the wooden planks and steel plates. He shrugged his shoulders and his body floated backwards. The virtual work area still flickered with light as it penetrated through the side of the yacht. It sank down and soon entered the depths of the lake. Lu got up and walked to the damaged side of the yacht in a few steps. She looked at the crack in the twisted steel plates in a daze. She only remembered to reply to the captain after a few seconds. She told him to send a crew over to begin the miserable comprehensive inspection process. It was night. North Mountain Lake was covered in a thick fog. The aberrations in the surrounding area were clearly restless. The sound of wind, the sound of water, and the howling continued without end. The people on the entire yacht were frightened and confused as they passed through the thick fog. As for the instigator, Luo Nan, he walked slowly underwater, going deeper and deeper. North Mountain Lake was essentially a dammed lake. Its deepest depth was over 200 meters. At the bottom of the lake were the remains of a large number of pre-World War III city buildings. Right now, they had become the nests of all kinds of underwater creatures and even aberrations. It was said that the government of Banqing City had been trying to explore and excavate. They even wanted to build a memorial at the bottom of the lake. However, with Luo Nan's arrival tonight, the remains of the buildings at the bottom of the lake were really unlucky. An invisible pressure came from the originally unrelated spacetime. Because of Luo Nan's existence, a portion of the structure interfered with the local spacetime, causing fine vibrations. Moreover, a large amount of undigested gambling capital flowed within this external spacetime structure. This increased the strength and weight of the interference. These gambling capital came from the grand gamble within the sacrificial altar framework constructed by the Wraith sign. The gamblers were Gong Qi, Lady Halder, and Rui Wen, who had interfered in the end. The banker presiding over the gambling house was undoubtedly Luo Nan. However, he had already completely lost his impartial standpoint. Together with the Wraith sign, who had constructed the sacrificial altar, he had gambled against his only opponent, Gong Qi. Gong Qi was powerless to destroy this situation. He didn't even see through the essence of this gambling house. The final result conformed to the logic that it should have. The only unexpected thing was that the course of events was much more relaxed than expected. From beginning to end, Gong Qi's counterattack was unable to truly touch the weak points and fatal points of Luo Nan's side. All of Gong Qi's struggles didn't deviate from Luo Nan's initial plans. This was undoubtedly the foundation of planning and the formation of a system of knowledge that took as long as half a year. It was the accumulation of a large amount of time in exchange for an instant explosive battle result. Luo Nan's rationality was able to analyze and explain when faced with such a battle result. However, there were times when he couldn't help but feel his heart soar. So it turns out that I can do this much. I can do this well. So it turns out that the power I can mobilize is this powerful. Luo Nan stopped at a certain high point in the gloomy depths of the water. This place should have been some high-grade office building from before the Third World War. Perhaps it was a landmark building from back in the day. The quality of the building was exceptionally good. It had withstood the flood peaks and mudslides of several decades ago. It had also withstood the water pressure of the past few years, as well as the torment of the mutants. Luo Nan stood at the edge of the roof. He spread his arms and took deep breaths. He was controlling his emotions, but he was also enjoying this moment of achievement. The bottom of the lake didn't give him a normal living environment, but the interference of the alternate spacetime structure was Luo Nan's strongest safeguard. Gong Qi had lost everything there. His extraordinary level soul structure and vast energy had been reduced to Lady Halder's next level of resources. And it was far beyond that. Rui Wen had cut off Gong Qi's life force. It was reasonable to say that she should have obtained a large portion, but she seemed to have reached a bottleneck. She didn't take too much. In addition, the Wraith sign guided and diverted a portion to be used as operating costs and future reserves for the Cobweb altar. The 3 Blood Soul temples shared some of the benefits. The built-in puppets and related believers all shared some of the benefits. But even like this, it wasn't completely divided. The rest was stored with Luo Nan, allowing his soul strength to explosively increase once more. Before this, every time Luo Nan's soul strength exploded with explosive growth, it was accompanied by a near-fatal risk of imbalance between his body and soul. But this time, the risk didn't come as expected. This was because a firm and highly efficient water conservancy project had appeared between his body and soul, which was still severely imbalanced. Perhaps it could be called Luo Nan's domain. The destructive expansion of his soul strength, as well as the large amount of undigested gambling capital, together with the unceasing mobilization and assembly of the configuration fragments, seeped into the precise spacetime structure bit by bit, undergoing an even deeper transformation. From the peak of a flood that splashed the sky, it transformed into an unending stream of electricity. Everything was clearly natural and smooth. Luo Nan understood that the most crucial factor within this was the configuration theory that he gradually grasped in depth. This knowledge system, which clearly surpassed the current level of Earth, rapidly solidified the foundation of his existence in this world. This was a good beginning, but it was merely a beginning. The psychic diagram continued to flash in the virtual work area in front of him. Luo Nan's gaze fell upon the sea tornado that originally belonged to Gong Qi. Following his attentive gaze, the fine lines and shadow structure continued to transform. During this process, Luo Nan's previously fluttering state of mind continued to settle as the details of the outline changed. Luo Nan gradually returned to tranquility. It was time to enter the arena. He had transformed from a pseudo-transcendent compositor into a true participant. This was because he possessed the ability to stand on equal footing with the other sea tornadoes right now. Chapter 798. Early in the morning, light shone through the shadows of the wood and stones in the garden. The warm light from the stone lamps in the houses automatically extinguished, allowing the light of nature to decorate the place. For a moment, the garden seemed to be filled with a thin layer of mist, cold and quiet. However, it was already late spring, less than 2 days before the beginning of summer. In many people's hearts, Ban City had already become hot. Yukawa Isuk knelt on the platform of the veranda and said nothing. He watched as the bamboo tube filled to the brim sent the clear stream into the shallow pond. Then, it snapped back to normal, startling the birds that had woken up early and causing them to flutter away. It was supposed to be a classic Zen skit, but his mind was like the birds that flew away, unable to calm down for a long time. Next to him, the head of intelligence, Takamoto Shigeru, was reporting in a low voice. Up until now, the Jade Light's voyage plan has not changed, but many of the people who made reservations and were invited have not been confirmed. Some people even canceled the trip because they were not feeling well. Yukawa Isuk waved his hand. Those who boarded the ship from Ban City are just supporters. Even 100 of Ban City's richest people can't compare to the president of the Ability User Association. President Abner returned to Chan City and confirmed that he would not participate in the auction. They can't even find a target to applaud. Takamoto Shigeru's voice was low. Regarding this matter, we can basically confirm that something has happened in Chan City. They have sealed off the news, but from multiple sources, about 20 hours ago, there was a strong energy reaction near Volcano Island. It is suspected that there was a conflict between extraordinaries, including death. Death? Takamoto Shigeru was shocked. Yukawa Isuk sat up straight, showing his cautious attitude towards the current situation. Just 2 minutes ago, he received the latest news from the Jade Society. On Volcano Island, Deputy Secretary Gong Qi, who had been in isolation for a long time, had his body destroyed. This news was beyond the scope of information that Takamoto Shigeru usually received and processed. For a moment, he didn't know how to react. He vaguely guessed that Yukawa Isuk was also shocked by the news, which was why he took the initiative to tell him about it. Because of this, Takamoto Shigeru automatically shut up and didn't make any comments, pretending that he was mute. Sometimes, rumors can become the truth. I've always been skeptical about the legend of Gong Chi discovering a new plane, but now I can almost confirm that it's true. Moreover, the situation is more complicated than expected. Now there's a guess: Gong Chi wasn't the only one who discovered the new plane. There were other people who intervened and took the opportunity to stab Gong Chi in the back. I don't want to talk about these things because it has nothing to do with us. Yukawa Isuke looked at Takamoto Shigeru. It seemed that the intelligence chief could understand his feelings. Takamoto Shigeru continued to play dumb. Even a pond under a typhoon cannot remain as calm as a mirror. Yukawa Isuke stared at the shallow puddle under the bamboo tube. There were no longer any ripples, but the impatience in his heart had not dissipated. The Ability User Association has begun to investigate the whereabouts of all the extraordinaries in the world, including the military movements of the various forces, down to the solidification of the abysses. Takamoto Mao's eyelids twitched. Thanks to Professor Luo's lectures over the past few months and the dissemination of relevant concepts, even a person like him who was lacking in cultivation had a conceptual understanding of the abyssal region configuration system. And the clearer it was, the more he understood the turbulent impact of this wave of operations. This was no longer just a fight between immortals. It had actually affected their side. So Takamoto Mao opened his mouth. A major investigation? It's a stupid idea because there's no clue at all. Let's not talk about the extraordinaries, all the orders will be investigated. Ban City is no exception. Even though we're separated by the Pacific Ocean, we can't avoid being caught in the crossfire. Ban City was known as the City of 10,000 Gods, or maybe it was a mockery, but it was an indisputable fact that there were many orders here. In particular, there was a portion of them that was supported by the Yukawa family. There were too many things to sort out. Yukawa Isuke instructed, "We'll investigate ourselves, but we'll also have to communicate with the Ban City branch and do the relevant things well. Now, we're not afraid of doing things, we're only afraid of people taking advantage of the opportunity to stir up trouble. So some things must be done first." "You mean?" Takamoto Shigeru could tell what he was implying, so he asked again. When I received the information from the Jade Review Society, someone told me that we need to calm things down and focus on the overall situation. According to our president's strategy, we should focus on attacking the broken lands. I agreed. Yukawa Isuke's lips curled, his cheeks twitching. But 2 minutes later, the Amaterasu cult called and asked to take the lead in this investigation, so that Ban City can be restored to a peaceful environment. At this point, Takamoto Mao finally understood the source of Yukawa Isuke's bad mood. They're going to reap another harvest? Yes. When most people are constrained by the overall situation and have to make sacrifices for it, there are some strong people who can ignore it and even make use of it. Isn't that stubborn guy still in Luo Yuandao's lab? I didn't expect his father to be so good as well. Takamoto Mao did not speak. He only took a deep breath and recalled the time when the Amaterasu cult used Ban City as the cauldron and many orders as ingredients to brew a pot of fresh soup. Now that one batch had been cut, a new batch had grown. Yukawa Isuke's resentment was not only directed at the Amaterasu cult. Everyone knows that Gong Chi has been in closed-door training for half a year. He was in closed-door training because he was forced back from Xia City by the Iron Triangle. He failed to kidnap Luo Nan. A new plane was involved, and Xia City was in chaos. Back then, Luo Nan was publishing the shocking cage and configuration theory. Now that something has happened, Xia City, no, Luo Nan's side is making a big move. They're staying out of this. Yukawa Isuke suddenly stopped talking, staring blankly. Takamoto Mao's eyelids twitched. He felt that this line of thought was very dangerous. Fortunately, Yukawa Isuke waved his hand. He just left Xia City. Even if he flew. He couldn't have flown there. It seemed very strange for him to explain it in such a serious manner. The two looked at each other again. Yukawa Isuke gave an order. Go do your job. Be thorough. Takamoto Mao got up, took 3 steps back, turned around, and left. Only Yukawa Aishuk was left under the eaves. He stared at the gradually brightening garden in silence. Around the same time, Snake Tongue slowly woke up in a high-class residence on the southern shore of North Mountain. Her eyes were half open. She moved her fingers and calves, slowly unblocking her blood vessels. Speaking of which, she had been lying on the tatami in the living room for a week. Her body's functions had inevitably declined. It was hard for her to get up for a while. There were finger-sized holes all around her body. These were the marks left behind by Mr. Georgia Wei Men. It was just this one wave. He really didn't care about her for the time being. If she hadn't woken up in time, she might have turned into a rotten corpse. Okay, I guess I was lucky. Snake Tongue laughed self-deprecatingly. She temporarily stopped struggling and looked at the dust under the morning sun. She was stunned speechless. Since she had been lying here for a long time, it was hard for the AI housekeeper to clean the room. A layer of dust had accumulated on the tatami after a few days. Her body was also covered in dust. She felt very uncomfortable in her mind. Snake Tongue loved cleanliness. She immediately ordered, "Mr. Hideji, prepare the hot spring." "As you command, madam." The high-class AI housekeeper responded with a mature and experienced voice. The room came alive in an instant. Several minutes later, Snake Tongue finally succeeded in struggling to get up. The first thing she did was enter the garden's hot spring pool to clean herself. All 4 sides were made of floor-to-ceiling sliding glass doors that formed a flowing space that seemed to be continuous. The center was filled with a pool of warm soup. She lay naked in it and sank to the bottom of the pool. Her skin was in full contact with the water. The minute water pressure, the different heat sensations of various parts of her body, the changes in temperature brought about by the ripples in the pool, and even the natural suffocation. The feeling of her body was so rich, exquisite, and real. In the past, she had never cared about or even looked down on her low-level perception. Now she felt that it wasn't enough no matter what. She could only experience it layer by layer, bit by bit. The warm water in the pool changed twice before Snake Tongue stood up, still not fully satisfied. Following her movements, one of the floor-to-ceiling glass windows automatically turned into a mirror. She looked at the graceful and slender body in the mirror, suffused with the luster of life. She stared blankly again. Her fingertips unconsciously streaked across her chest and touched her cheeks. She immediately chanted an incantation and peeled off a fog-like veil. Having lost the camouflage effect of the veil of invisibility, the face in the mirror was both similar and different from a few seconds ago. It was precisely this face in the mirror that faintly furrowed her brows. Her emotions couldn't be clearly discerned, but the surroundings were covered in mist. The hazy mist was different from the mist in the warm spring. It was suffused with a peculiar gray substance. Snake Tongue's mind shivered. She didn't care about her current state of being completely naked. She prostrated herself on the ground. However, no information was transmitted from the mist. There was only an insignificant weight that fell on her back. She almost thought it was an illusion. In fact, that unique feeling and the subtle gravitational pull of the veil of invisibility beside her hand clearly told Snake Tongue the answer. The veil of silence. She had once yearned for it in her dreams, a wondrous item that she had nearly gambled her life on, and it had fallen into her hands just like that. At this moment, Snake Tongue's heart was like the mist in a hot spring. It was overflowing and empty. The feeling was indescribable. She maintained her kneeling position for nearly 3 minutes. After confirming that there were no further instructions, she pulled off the veil of silence from her back and stood up. She naturally combined the 2 strands of fine yarn together. They could sense each other, but they were still a bit lacking. Snake Tongue wasn't disappointed. This was all within reason. What's more, this sort of matter was nothing. Mr. Hideji, a news bulletin. Also, prepare a car for me. Snake Tongue left the hot spring room and composed herself for a bit. She used the AI butler to activate the myriad spirit sex internal system. All sorts of information began to converge here. The two orbits of the secular world and the inner world practically didn't intersect. Under normal circumstances, this would be the case. However, the current situation was that there was a piece of news that stood at the same time as the hot topic of both domains. The flying devil ray. The humanoid infrasonic array. Snake Tongue constantly updated herself with recent information. At the same time, she spent even more energy earnestly grooming herself. Before long, the radiant Lady Kitayama Yuki appeared in the dressing mirror. The car arrived, and Snake Tongue dressed up and went out. When she left, it was 9:00 on May 3, 2097. Miraculously, there was a 24-hour difference from the earliest time the news broke out. Chapter 799. Mrs. Kitashin Yuahui, who had always lived in seclusion, suddenly went out in a car. This became a moderate amount of news in this residential area. The housewives cast their gazes from the gardens, streets, bedrooms, and other positions and angles. They gathered all sorts of details and prepared them for today's conversation. Those gazes and vulgar thoughts certainly couldn't be hidden from Snake Tongue. In the past, she simply couldn't be bothered to waste her thoughts on such matters. But today, she looked through the car window and swept her gaze over this residential area with great interest. She looked at the gardens on both sides of the road, as well as the faintly familiar faces inside and outside the gardens. Compared to the boundless and repetitive clouds, so what if it was vulgar? Those pale faces smeared with foundation and lipstick also glowed with a gorgeous color. The hired professional driver drove silently. The relevant route had already been properly arranged. After leaving the residential area, they entered the main road around the lake on the southern shore of Beishan Lake. The foundation of this high-standard magnetic track was extremely high. When it was first constructed, it served as a second breakwater. As the car drove on it, they could clearly see the boundless blue waves of Beishan Lake. As for the strong and sturdy camphor tree on the lakeside, it was nearly 30 meters tall. It firmly pressed down on the main road around the lake. Even from here, they still had to look up. Looking at the extended branches of the tree crown, it was truly like the arm of a giant spirit stretched horizontally between Beishan Lake and Ban City. It caused people to involuntarily feel reverence. It was precisely because of this majestic appearance and the miraculous stories that had been passed down for several decades that Mr. Jorajiman still had no lack of incense offerings, even during the day or on a working day. Snake Tongue could feel a certain spirituality that was becoming increasingly perfect through the incense and faith. It revolved and flowed, combing the dual environment of matter and spirit, nourishing and strengthening it little by little. Her gaze was cold and clear, and her thoughts were cold. At the same time, there was also a thought that swept past the car. The two sides touched and then separated. It could be considered a greeting, but the mood was cold. Snake Tongue didn't reprimand Jorajiman, and the latter didn't have any intention of apologizing. The friendship between the two was roughly like this. Half a year was enough for them to be completely consumed, so it wasn't strange. As for the future direction of the jointly established Myriad Spirit Order, or even the future of the two, whether it was Snake Tongue or the Jordan Gate, they didn't have the authority to take the lead. This was because there was a certain Lord on the surface of North Mountain Lake. Snake Tongue and Zojia Wyman both consciously and unconsciously followed the will of that person. Snake Tongue was the conscious one. As for Mr. Zojia Wyman, it would depend on how he would react later. The car quickly turned off Lake Circle Drive. Snake Tongue had already prepared a boat here. She was prepared to go to the lake to pay her respects to that person. But before she could set off, she saw a fishing boat on the lake. On the boat was a familiar young woman who was smiling at her from afar. Soon, the two sides met at the pier. Snake Tongue had already thought about it. She had indeed seen this woman before her. A week ago, Luo Nan had summoned her soul and summoned her soul. Her soul and body were one for a short period of time, and she would occasionally see this face. It was just that it was hidden in a dreamy and illusory mist. It was hard to tell if it was real or fake. Right now, there was no need to bother distinguishing. It was certainly someone close to Luo Nan, without a doubt. Even though Snake Tongue was able to determine that this person's cultivation was a level lower than hers, she still bowed respectfully in greeting. Sinner Snake Tongue greets the High Envoy. Yin Li's eyes stirred slightly. Snake Tongue wore a traditional kimono. She came in splendid attire. Her words and actions were humble and ancient. She simply adopted the posture of paying respect to a god. Naturally, she elevated Luo Nan to an extremely lofty position. Then, could she, a temporary secretary, truly be able to steadily occupy a position as lofty as that of a god? Yin Li's thoughts turned to one side, and she smiled. She avoided Snake Tongue's greeting and bowed slightly at the same time. I don't dare. My humble name is Yin Lu. I am the Vice Ablatum of the Blood Flame Order. I follow the orders of the First Ablatum to serve by Mr. Side. I don't deserve the title of High Envoy. The Blood Flame Order? The one from Xia City? Snake Tongue didn't participate in the final battle to kill Gong Qi, so she had no way of knowing of the close relationship between Luo Nan and the Blood Flame Order. It was hard not to be surprised when she heard this. But this was not the time for her to ask clearly. She could only suppress the suspicions in her mind and maintain a respectful and submissive posture. She hoped that Yin Lu would pass on the message and allow her to meet her lord. The response from the other side was rather odd. Ms. North Mountain, according to Mr., you're a fan of the Mountain Stream Band? Snake Tongue raised her head in shock and saw Yin Li's deep smile. Her mind immediately flashed, and she responded a second later, what the Lord says is naturally correct. An intelligent person's intelligent reply. In this way, Yin Lu saved quite a bit of talking. She faintly sensed that Snake Tongue's existence would create a certain amount of competition for her. But from a rational perspective, she clearly understood that there was no meaning in this so-called jealousy. Her duty was to ensure that the information was accurately transmitted down the chain of command. It just so happens that Mountain Stream is currently rehearsing. Ms. North Mountain can go take a look. You're an actor, and they're singers. The difference in their fields is quite large. But no matter how you look at it, you're still an artist. You're their senior. You can interact with them at a close distance. Oh, I just so happen to have something to do in the city. Can I hitch a ride? Of course. Snake Tongue invited Yin Lu into the car. There was a bit of modesty between the two. In the end, Yin Lu chose the seat behind the driver, leaving the front passenger seat for Snake Tongue. The car drove to the center of Sakura City. On the way, Yin Lu gave Snake Tongue information on the Mountain Stream Band, especially information on the relationship between Moya and Luo Nan. She also gave a general explanation of the current situation. Actually, Yin Lu herself didn't quite understand why Snake Tongue was involved. She didn't even understand the process of Luo Nan awakening and subduing this former enemy of hers. On the other side, Snake Tongue felt deep disbelief towards the background of Luo Nan being threatened. The Yuchuan family actually did such a thing to threaten a deity that had slain extraordinaries. Was it because their lord was too low-key? Both sides had unresolved suspicions, but they were intimidated by Luo Nan's existence, so it wasn't easy for them to communicate in depth. The two vaguely came to a realization. They were two pieces of a puzzle in Luo Nan's hands. They were placed in different areas according to the will of that person. As for the complete picture, it probably only existed in Luo Nan's heart. Or perhaps it would only appear in its entirety at the final stage. Regardless of whether it was Snake Tongue or Yin Lu, they were both people who were good at communicating. After opening the door to the driver's seat, there was no need to worry about the driver. They soon found many new topics to talk about. For example, the Jordan Gate and the Myriad Spirit Order, the relationship between the Blood Flame Order and Luo Nan, and so on. Although it wasn't to the extent of revealing everything, it could help each other understand and communicate more. In the end, they talked about Luo Nan's current activities. Yin Lu was actually a bit distressed. The Ray Ray needs to be docked for a complete overhaul. It will take at least a week. Mr. will need to find another ride for his daily needs. But it's not easy to find a yacht of the same specifications in a short period of time without leaving any traces. Luo Nan didn't care about his living conditions, but a secretary like Yin Le had to be perfect no matter what. Snake Tongue couldn't comment too much on this sort of matter. She only acted in the proper manner and said, if Milord doesn't mind this sinner's humble dwelling, it would be good for her to temporarily move in. Yin Le didn't think that Luo Nan would go live in a residential area with many eyes and ears. She just responded politely, I will mention it to Mr. Well, if Luo Nan hadn't found a suitable replacement yacht by the time he returned. Speaking of which, didn't he spend too much time at the bottom of the lake? Mobile version, M. Chapter 800. May 5th, around 8 p.m., the night sky of Bansheng was like the skirt of a goddess. Tonight, there was no longer a mysterious and ascetic atmosphere, but it was dyed with dazzling fireworks. Every time it swayed, there were hundreds of thousands of cold and warm colors, flowing and changing, beautiful beyond compare. But tonight, the most dazzling thing was that it was below, not above, in the water, not in the sky. On the south bank of Beishan Lake, a grand and gorgeous stage was set up on the floating water. The high-pitched sound of electric guitars, wrapped in the whistling of tens of thousands of fans, citizens, and tourists, suppressed the low hum of the fireworks and announced the official start of the Bansheng Music Festival. On the embankment, the Bansheng police were facing a great enemy. Thousands of people formed a human wall to prevent fanatical fans from trampling or even falling into the lake. At this time, the two sides and the back of the main stage were also surrounded by large and small boats. Compared to the warm atmosphere on the shore, it was not inferior at all. On the stage on all sides, guests from all directions, I am the first. Dazzling. Wang Mo, the melodic guitarist of the Mountain Stream Band, did not have his usual stuffy temperament. He desperately leaned against the side of the ship and seized the best viewing position, greedily absorbing the atmosphere of the stage. The band that opened the music festival was undoubtedly a world-class band. Every one of them was his idol and the goal that he hoped to achieve in his dreams. After envy, he suddenly felt bored. We want to go on stage. Let's go to the road show. Bassist Huang Xiangdong was already drunk. He raised his arms and shouted, which attracted the attention of the people around him, but it was rare for him to hit Wang Mo's heart. Wang Mo sighed. His performance was over. Among the hundreds of bands participating in the Bansheng Music Festival, the level of Mountain Stream Band could only be said to be below average. The invited performance was just a warm-up performance, and it was not the turn of the main stage. The small concert that ended 2 hours ago was their only performance task in Bansheng. In fact, most of the bands participating in the music festival were like this, and then they had to find their own way out. The roadshow was not shameful, and this was the ecology of underground bands. The problem was that the lead singer of the band was leaving tomorrow, so what was the point of playing? Oh, beauty. Huang Xiangdong seemed to have made a big discovery. His voice suddenly became sharp, just like his terrible high pitch. Wang Mo was too lazy to turn his head. Instead, it was the old keyboard player Ma Lu, who was also holding a beer bottle behind him. He narrowed his slightly dazed eyes and stamped his seal. TSK, a beauty in a kimono, how nice. Where is it? The newest drummer to join the band, Jeff Lewin, was small in stature, but he was a typical ADHD patient. Even in a crowd, he would jump back and forth. His vitality and curiosity were first class. Ma Lu responded kindly, on the right, on the shore, in a plain green kimono. Ah, what a dignified beauty. Wang Mo curled his lips. Actually, he had also seen it. Indeed, the figure and tone of the lady in the kimono were very aesthetically pleasing. However, in the darkness of the night and under the flashing lights of the fireworks, all the scenes had their own filter effect. In the end, it was just a self-anesthesia mixed with imagination. Compared to a lofty science student, Jeffren's brain circuits were obviously less complicated. In fact, he was already so high that he didn't know where he was. Right? Which is right? Like new like best. Huang Xiangdong shouted in his ear, ride, ride. Jeffren instantly understood. He jumped to the shore and looked. Soon, he laughed out loud and raised his arm to shout. Beauty! Bijasang, Oniai-chan. Wang Mo covered his face. Perhaps it was better to just go back to Xia City. As a science student, he really couldn't stand this. Separated by dozens of meters of water, there was also the noise of music and people. Jeffren's shouting couldn't have reached that side. However, perhaps it was a coincidence, but the lady really did turn her face. Her gaze seemed to be focused on the boat. Jeffren was even more excited. He wished he could throw his arm out. Wang Mo had no choice but to squeeze half a body to the side with difficulty to avoid being stepped on. As soon as he moved, he heard an ouch. Jeffren's knee hit the railing of the boat. However, Jeffren didn't feel any pain at all. Even the shout wasn't caused by pain, but by mental stimulation. He slammed the railing hard, his vocal cords torn. That Oniai-chan. Viper. Viper. The people around them gave him sidelong glances, thinking that this guy had indeed gone overboard. In the end, Huang Xiangdong, who was of the same kind, looked back and forth a few times before suddenly coming to a realization. Ah, that outdated actress, that crazy and arrogant Shue something. Jeffren slapped Huang Xiangdong on the shoulder. That's right, that's right. It's that hypocritical woman. Last night, I searched for half the night but couldn't find that kind of film. Today, at the fan meeting, she also came. I'm really grateful that she didn't scold me in front of me. Wang Mo and Ma Lu also looked enlightened. It was rare for the four band members to reach a consensus. They also had a deep impression of the lady in the kimono on the shore. After all, not every fan would be like that person, denouncing words like, apart from the lead singer, the band members are just a collection of mediocre talents. Moreover, even for lead singer Moya, that person's evaluation was like, rhythm is far better than voice, temperament and appearance are more valuable, after closing your eyes, it's guitar skills that save you and your teammates, and so on. Under that elegant and dignified skin, there must be cold and slippery snake scales. Wang Mo felt uncomfortable. This woman, based on her makeup, she should go to the opera. Why did she come to listen to rock and talk nonsense about a small band like ours? Old Ma Lu also stayed up late last night to do his homework. According to the information on the internet, she does have the qualifications to be in the Baozhong troupe. This was a god-level figure. The school couldn't afford to offend her. Wang Mo shrank back, but Jeffren was still there jumping. She must be depressed. Well, maybe she's cold on the outside but warm on the inside? If I do. Even if her ovaries are full of dry firewood, it's not up to you to light a spark. What are you looking at? This is a society that looks at face, regardless of gender. Huang Xiangdong raised his thumb and poked behind his shoulder. When he was criticizing his companions, his thoughts and sense of direction were very clear, and his emphasis was also very accurate. Girl. Oh. Jeffren dragged out his tone, but he was not angry. In fact, men were very tolerant of this kind of beautiful scene. He just sighed. I've long heard that he's super popular with women. I've come to Banqing to see for myself. 3. 4. What a waste. Huang Xiangdong gave him the tip of his pinky again. Be content. She didn't attract water, otherwise, how could it be your turn? Jeffren was still not angry. The two men talked about laughed together, and then hugged their heads and howled. Everything was said without words. The chaos on the lower deck mixed with the noise on the half-closed observation deck on the upper deck, leaving no quiet corner. However, as long as there was a need and mood, people could always subconsciously filter out some external noise and build a subjective private space. Of course, if there were 3 bodyguards who could quietly separate a small space, the material foundation of the atmosphere would be stronger. At this time, Emoya's heart was quiet and peaceful. She chatted with her close friend while leaning on the railing. No matter what the topic was, it was full of fun and mood. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but the kimono-clad beauty on the shore just so happened to be the topic of Emoya and Tang Yi's conversation. Unlike the traditional clothing on the opposite shore, the two on this side were casual and tended to be neutral. They were both tall and handsome. When they stood together, it was like they were models in a blockbuster. They were full of fashion sense. But the words flowed with the flavor of memories. In your eyes, our performance is probably riddled with holes. You can't bear to see it? Oh. I remember. A certain person's evaluation of the 93 Intramural Music Festival was purely the same. Do I need to repeat myself? I just have some doubts about your method of classification. Okay, I'm saying that there's no need to distinguish too clearly. Tang Yi reached out and gently twirled a strand of hair on Emoya's cheek. Hair is hair. In most cases, 1, 2, 3, or 5 strands are meaningless. It's a joke. Don't change my established view. In any case, from Uncle and Luo Nan, I understand that family members with the same bloodline have heaven and earth differences in talent. Not to mention you and me. You're indeed like you. You realize early on, but it doesn't hinder you from hitting your head and bleeding. How so? Emoya's smile blossomed. She moved closer, ignoring the surrounding gazes, and lightly kissed Tang Yi's cheek. I'm the most optimistic person. I'm waiting for everyone by my side to realize their talent and realize their dreams. After all, there are no family members waiting there. The moment of success is perhaps the saddest moment. Wow. You can use it as material for a speech. Uncle instilled in me. Perhaps it can be called the ultimate background wall achievement. Now that I think about it, perhaps it's just coaxing a child. But there's no other way. I'm very coaxed. It wasn't very funny, but the two had their foreheads pressed together. Their temples rubbed together, and they couldn't help but laugh. Naturally, it attracted the gazes of others. Tang Yi didn't care about the gazes of others. But when she connected Emoya's uncle with the more direct information of his identity, her mind drifted for a moment. Luo Zhongheng. That researcher that Li Wei didn't hesitate to take action personally. Could his talent really break through the generation gap of civilization? Or was it a miracle that was fed by an even more inconceivable resource? If it was the former, then it would be very difficult for miracles to appear in a short period of time. But if it was the latter, where was the inconceivable resource that could make miracles appear again? In the past year, similar questions had been tormenting those high and mighty fellows. Should they continue to indulge and observe? Or should they nip at the bud of a crisis before the next Luo Zhongheng appeared to avoid paying a greater price? After a few forks in the road, the situation was on the verge of going out of control. Or perhaps, it had already gone out of control without them realizing it. She sighed softly. The clouds in Bansheng are very thick. Emoya looked up. The fireworks in the sky had yet to dissipate. The flames and the remaining smoke intertwined. It was thick and colorful, and the senses weren't clear enough. But as for the clouds, she really didn't see any. Instead, there was a huge airship slowly cruising through the colorful streams of light. The fireworks exploded around the airship. Bai Xinyan gently raised her wine glass. The clear wine reflected the colors, and there were slight distortions as the molecules in the air vibrated and spread. At that moment, even through the completely sealed observation window, she seemed to smell the strong smell of gunpowder. Tomorrow, the head of the Department of Environment will probably have to bow and apologize. Yu Chuaningjie didn't pay attention to these meaningless words. He sat upright on the sofa and stared at the visual dynamic data chart in front of him. The chart was divided into multiple functional areas, causing the overall chart to appear rather complicated. Only the top left corner of the chart showed the passenger flight information directly from the airline's database. The photo of Moya, Luo Nan's cousin, occupied a very eye-catching area. Yuchuaningjie stared at the photo for a long time. Finally, he lowered his eyelids and tapped the virtual key on the sofa's armrest. In an instant, the data chart on the screen was swept clean. The projection area dimmed. "You gave up halfway?" Bai Xinyan's voice came again. Yuchuaningjie really didn't want to pay attention to this awkward topic. But when he thought of Bai Xinyan's ambiguous relationship with Wang Yu, as well as her special status in the Apocalypse Laboratory, he paused for a few seconds before finally giving an explanation. "We still can't find Luo Nan. We've already used Banqing's 24/7 surveillance network, mobilized the satellite overhead, and even the police's information-based surveillance. But to no avail. It's like he disappeared into thin air. If I didn't misunderstand, you wouldn't have made a move against Luo Nan's sister if you couldn't find him?" Yuchuaningjie hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Basically, yes." Then he couldn't help but explain. Wang Yu's goal was to make Luo Nan bow his head and personally participate in the high seas auction. That's all. Right now, that fellow might have already ridden the Devil Ray to the center of the Pacific Ocean. Why do we need to draw legs on a snake? Is that so? I thought you were helping him cook the eagle. You saw through but didn't say it out loud, woman. Yuchuaningjie admitted that he had been befuddled at the time. He thought of things too simply. Now he could only vaguely explain, "I'm just a businessman." "Oh, I thought that there were only ambitious capitalists in the Appraiser Jade Society. You're just more confident in capital." Yuchuaningjie was very happy to change the topic. He even used a certain person's words to endorse. Didn't Wang Yu often say that capital is the expansion of human nature? As long as people have desires, as long as exchange exists in the world, as long as the flow of capital exceeds production capacity, then capital is the ultimate choice. It is the undefeatable king. Standing on the side of victory is a very natural thing. I'm just learning and practicing. You're just blowing pillow talk. It's a pity that I don't plan on rolling in the sheets with him in the near future. To me, the power of capital is still too insubstantial. I still prefer direct, strong people. Bai Xinyan walked over from the other side of the viewing window. She arrived in front of Yuchuaningjie and closed the distance between them. "Wang Yu, and you. You still haven't been able to break through the barrier between reality and nothingness. Keep working hard. Perhaps success is right in front of you. Thank you for your encouragement." The blood vessels on Yuchuaningjie's temples throbbed a few times. In the end, he revealed a gentle and polite smile. Luo Nan's matter was considered over. Even though the Appraiser Jade Society and Wang Yu's side had yet to be formally explained, he had already made up his mind. To him, the risk came from many levels and many directions. Compared to the immediate survival crisis of traveling at multiple times the speed of sound, the crisis of breaking through the defense of the horsemen, and the crisis of trust that shook the foundation of the Yuchuan family's rule in Banqing due to him inviting disaster, the Appraiser Jade Society's dissatisfaction was actually a problem that was easier to overcome. When all was said and done, his rash provocation was a foolish act of drawing legs on a snake from the very beginning. His excessive attention to Wang Yu caused serious problems in his judgment. Now was the time to cut some meat to stop his losses. He might be at Wang Yu's beck and call right now, but if the situation continued to worsen, it wasn't impossible for that person to do things like borrowing someone's head. He thanked the Amaterasu cult. He thanked the powerful person who had gotten rid of Gong Qi. He thanked the Ability User Association, who had been infuriated. He even thanked the Amaterasu cult, who couldn't wait to cut the chives. The sudden unforeseen event and the corresponding actions gave him ample reason. And so, Yuchuaningjie sighed. Of course, there are more practical considerations. The Amaterasu cult's identification operation is imminent. His Holiness certainly doesn't want to cause any more trouble. Bai Xinyan smiled at him. Yuchuaningjie had a sincere expression on his face, distracting others before a major operation. If an accident were to happen and cause more trouble, it would be hard for me to explain it to His Holiness. Tomorrow's encounter with the head of the Department of Environmental Affairs will be my end. Yuchuanningjie had only casually found an example when he spoke, but when he said it, he realized that there was no difference in essence. Yuchuanningjie sighed in his heart. There was indeed a barrier between the power of capital and supernatural power. When the world was in the old era of muscles and machines, capital could easily dominate everything. But after the era of distortion, supernatural power was obviously more direct and oppressive than capital power. The aloof higher-ups of the cult did not care what kind of impact the upcoming series of operations would have on the secular world. After all, there were people like the Yuchuan family, who were willing to stick their heads out and solve all the problems in the future. There was no other way. Capital was such a shameless thing. Whoever could make it multiply would be the benefactor. As for the right to lead. Speaking of which, how much money did the Apocalypse Laboratory need to invest in the Bloodline project to achieve the desired results? Was that Li Wei really trustworthy? His research direction and research subjects were far beyond the established system, causing even the most demanding investor to lose their professional judgment. And the series of results that pointed to the ultimate mystery of life made the core circle of capitalists in the world invest money like crazy. One project after another, year after year, no one knew when it would end. Yuchuanningjie was a little distracted when he suddenly heard Bai Xinyan say, "If you don't need this projection area, can you lend it to me temporarily?" "Of course." This is something you brought up when you boarded the ship." "It's a set of newly developed professional equipment. It's still in the experimental stage. It was just delivered from the deep blue world yesterday." Bai Xinyan sat on the sofa and sat side by side with Yuchuanningjie. Then, she picked up the black suitcase beside her and opened the complicated lock. "I heard that Pope Hyaku spent a lot of money in Bansheng, so I wanted to use this special situation to test the effects of the equipment. I don't think the Pope will mind." "Test?" Yuchuanningjie frowned. Hyaku was the name of the Amaterasu Order's Pope. It sounded weird, but his son, the true god of the order, was even weirder. He was called something like Qianju. Of course, almost no one dared to call him that anymore. Yuchuanningjie would not follow Bai Xinyan's lead and used honorifics. His Holiness has always been magnanimous. If Miss Xinyan had communicated with him beforehand, it's not too late now. As soon as he finished speaking, their gazes met and they stared at each other. Then, the area was silent for more than 10 seconds. Both of them were waiting for something, but there was no new information in the air. Did this count as a pass? Yuchuanningjie was not in a daze. Instead, he used a special channel to inform the Pope. Now, it was obvious that he had accepted it. Well, it was said that the Amaterasu Order had the closest relationship with the Apocalypse Laboratory among the three major orders. There was always a reason behind it. The Yuchuan family and Wang Yu might not be a match for each other in terms of connections in the Amaterasu Pure Land. Yuchuanningjie adjusted his state of mind and said, "Is this equipment for commercial use or something more important?" "Commercial use." The board of directors hopes to use the recent craze to make it a hot commodity. It is an indispensable piece of equipment for the future. It is to contribute to the project's goal of making a profit. Making a profit? Yuchuanningjie shook his head slightly. "Forgive me for being blunt, but we don't spend tens of billions of dollars on the Apocalypse Laboratory every year because we want the money to go to our descendants. We want to see something different, at least something clearer. I understand. You want to use the breeding ground of capital to breed a bastard with extraordinary power. But forgive me for being blunt, but this kind of method that goes against the basic ethics of the universe will not be effective. Perhaps it should be like natural life, using countless mutated and evolved offspring to select the most suitable result. But when I was investing, the investment document I received described a very direct reverse restoration process. You should be familiar with the way capital tells stories." "All right, Mr. Yuchuan. I am not the representative of the Apocalypse Laboratory, and I have no intention of explaining anything to Mr. Li Wei. As a shareholder, you can directly request the board of directors for more details." As for now, as a handsome gentleman, you should help the lady in front of you arrange this sophisticated equipment. Perhaps, you will be rewarded with a kiss in the end. Thank you for your kind offer. Yu Chuaningjie did not mind sharing women with Wang Yu, but he definitely would not share danger. He quickly lowered his stance and rolled up his sleeves to help Bai Xinyan connect the equipment in the suitcase to the projector. About half a minute later, the projection area lit up again. At first, Yu Chuaningjie thought that he saw some kind of screensaver. It was a scene of bubbles and water droplets rising. It was very realistic, but he could still tell that it was an animation effect. Should we get to the main topic now? The change in the projection was somewhat out of Yu Chuaningjie's expectations. It was still the same animation effect. Countless bubbles, droplets. In short, it was just a shape. Layer upon layer, colliding and distorting. Soon, it spread throughout the projection area. The corresponding angle of view was stretched and expanded. The details were blurred, but the overall appearance was more and more spectacular and chaotic. Closing one's eyes for a second and then opening them again to look, it was like diving in the summer. Entering the grotesque shallow sea, colorful and gorgeous, yet no substantial structure could be seen. It was also impossible to distinguish where the sunlight came from. What is this? It's currently the most popular trend in the world. To be exact, it's the most popular trend in the inner world. The laboratory's temporary name for it is the mental ocean mimicry picture. Huh. The general idea is that through large-scale calculations and special modules, a rough picture of the mental plane within an area is simulated. Though the accuracy isn't high, and the reaction is lagging, making it impossible to use in actual combat, if it becomes popular, its authenticity will increase after a period of data collection. At the very least, this will be the case in the relatively low-level mental ocean. Yu Chuaningjie digested the core concept in Bai Xinyan's words with great difficulty. His eyebrows furrowed into a knot. The trend you're talking about is Luo Nan's, that's right. The cage theory. Then what about the modules? Of course it borrows the concept of a cage, but it's simplified into bubbles or droplets for the sake of easy calculation. So this is borrowing? Different paths lead to the same destination. It's just like the close relationship between a cage and a configuration. Of course, there are also people who are considering whether or not to ask Luo Nan to endorse this product. Is there an instruction manual? Yu Chuaningjie spent close to 20 minutes while Bai Xinyan was adjusting the equipment. He roughly read through the instruction manual for the mimicry picture generator. The more he understood, the more he felt that this gadget was brilliant beyond his imagination. Miss Xinyan, if I'm not mistaken, this gadget is a panoramic probe into the mental domain of reality. There has never been such a device before. Not yet. It's just an animation simulation based on a special module and mode. The precision, breadth, and depth of the detection are all greatly limited. It's even possible for it to be completely different from reality. No. This is an epoch-making invention. As long as the cage theory can stand firm. Yu Chuaningjie gained a new understanding of the accumulated technology of the Apocalypse Laboratory. Due to the short time and shallow understanding, he was still unable to estimate what sort of impact it would have on the current world, especially the inner world, if a large amount of similar equipment were to leak out. However, he already sensed the sensitive factors within. Your Majesty really agrees to use this set of equipment? There's no need to doubt Pope Baiji's magnanimity. Bai Xinyan didn't even blink. Besides, this set of equipment has a limited sensing range. If we don't count the peripherals, it's only around a dozen square kilometers. What's wrong with observing a corner and watching the excitement? So that's how it is. Yukawa Kosuke put on a look of relief, but he was thinking to himself, for superhumans, especially those in the spiritual side and the religious circle, this kind of method is already close to prying, especially when it comes to the most chaotic and secretive spiritual domain in the past. For anyone who has the knowledge and foundation of supernatural powers, the spiritual domain has its own unique charm and attraction. I'll secretly buy similar equipment later and try to cover Bansheng. At that moment, after Bai Xinyan's adjustments, the colors of the dazzling ocean at the beginning of the simulation had almost completely faded. Now, most of it had turned into an inconspicuous grayish-white color. Only a few small colored spots would occasionally appear at random times and in random areas. It was like the result of an electron beam that had been deflected on an ancient flat-screen display. Bai Xinyan explained that this was to treat the repeated mental waves and the corresponding changes as background radiation. Only those that exceeded the relevant threshold would be paid attention to. It was also a stopgap measure due to the lack of peripherals and the limitations of computing power. As the time for the Amaterasu cult to take action approached, Yuchuanningjie shut his mouth and stared at the projection without blinking. At that moment, Bai Xinyan considerately placed a blurred satellite image behind the background radiation to achieve a simple correspondence between the animation and the map in reality. According to Professor Luo's theory, the spiritual ocean and the material world do not have a strict spatial correspondence. However, as long as there is a material foundation, the simulation signal will always have a basic direction due to the limitations of space. Just don't take it too seriously. As she spoke, she manually operated the sensor's knob and adjusted the sensor's direction. She explained, the sensor's direction is limited. Limiting the direction will effectively increase the accuracy of the sensor. Currently, we are still enriching the structure of the background radiation. After all, Pontiff Hyaki hasn't really taken action yet. The aberrant population around Beishan Lake has always been rich. Early sampling and identification is essential. Yuchuanningjie could not help but say, as for the southern shore of Beishan Lake, the aberrant population has basically been wiped out. The only thing that's still standing is that camphor tree. Oh, I know. You're Mr. Sakiman, right? Bai Xinyan did another round of delicate operations. About 10 seconds later, a colorful area that was clearly different from the overall background appeared in the dark ocean. The area looked like a child's carefully blown soap bubble. It was distorted in the rippling airflow and refracted 7 colored rays of light. It looked like it could burst at any time, but it always maintained its overall structure in the nick of time. After looking at it for a while, Yuchuanningjie felt that this huge bubble had an extraordinary resilience. It was completely different from the small, gray bubbles beside it that could burst at any time. This is the structure of the aberrant species in the spiritual ocean. If it really existed, it would be very eye-catching. Bai Xinyan praised softly, then shook her head. It's a pity that the current equipment is not enough to analyze its internal structure. A living creature like this that clearly possesses a certain level of intelligence and a fixed spiritual dimension is a very precious research material. It's a pity. Yuchuanningjie knew that this Mr. Sakiman, who had already become a spirit, was the ingredient chosen in advance by the Amaterasu cult to make a fresh soup. If he missed tonight, he would not have another chance to study it. Fortunately, there was still enough mutants in this era, not to mention other things. Yuchuanningjie also noticed that after the mimicry image appeared, the entire projection area was constantly refreshed. Before focusing on Sakiman, the entire spiritual ocean image was dark. The changes brought about by the refresh were not very obvious. But now, with a relatively clear target, there were obvious changes every time the image refreshed. It looked like it had been done by a clumsy editor. It was very uncomfortable. Yuchuanningjie had mild obsessive-compulsive disorder. He frowned when he saw this. As expected, it was only a half-finished product. Now, he could only force himself to adapt to such flaws. Besides not blinking his eyes, he also secretly turned on the recording function. He recorded the entire process of the mimicry image's display and used it as material for research and analysis. Compared to Sakiman, Yuchuanningjie was more interested in the Amaterasu cult. As the undisputed protagonist of tonight's event, what kind of methods would the Pope use? What kind of form would it appear in the spiritual ocean picture? After locking onto Sakiman, the 30th refresh passed. Yuchuanningjie finally saw a new change in the mimicry image. It was a crisscrossing band of dark colors. It was like a spider web or a crack in glass that appeared and spread out. Most of them were very slender, but their color was darker. In contrast, the originally dark background became a brighter grayish-white color. These extremely dark lines were like deep crevices. They looked like they could shatter the projection area at any time. It looks like the roots of a large tree. Huh. Bai Xinyan's visual thinking was quite different from Yuchuanningjie's. But after being reminded by her, Yuchuanningjie immediately thought of a concept that the Amaterasu cult was famous for. Are you talking about the Fusang tree? Bai Xinyan looked over and slightly curled her lips. She shook her head. Haven't you heard of the theory of distinguishing between tools and plants? Yuchuanningjie blinked. Elites like him always did their homework before taking action. As a result, even if it was something non-specialized, he would always have some impression of it. It's Luo Nan again. That's right. It's Professor Luo Nan's brilliant theory again. In his opinion, the cult's solidified structure in the abyss area is like a towering tree. More importantly, its roots are complex. It reaches down from the abyss area into the dense cage of the spiritual ocean and absorbs nutrients. This is a verification. Yuchuanningjie kept his mouth shut. When it came to the foundation of the cult, playing deaf and mute was the minimum level of self-restraint. But he still had some doubts in his heart. The name, Fusang Divine Tree, was quite appropriate, but what was the corresponding nourishment? After a few more rounds of refreshing, there was an obvious change in the flow of scenes. The colorful bubble that corresponded to Zoe's gate, which was now obviously shrinking, gave Kosuke Yuchuan a more intuitive feeling. This person, and those new leaks that had grown out again. What is this long stripe? Yuchuanningjie made a new discovery. In the simulated image, there was a faint bright line that ran through the entire projection area. It came diagonally from the top, roughly from the direction of the depths of North Mountain Lake. It moved about 1/10 of the screen's length before suddenly disappearing. A few seconds later, after several refreshes, the conspicuous band of light changed its angle and appeared at the edge of the south bank. At the same time, it twisted and distorted, severing the entire projection effect. Miss Xinyan? Bai Xinyan didn't respond. She just adjusted the equipment, her eyes unprecedentedly focused. After a few operations, the bright stripe disappeared from the projection area once more, as if it was just an accident. Is it a bug in the equipment? Huh. The bright stripe appeared once more. This time, it lasted much longer than the previous 2 times. It flickered and cut within the projection area, running amok. Is it a display error, or is it a special phenomenon in the mental domain? It's interference. What kind of interference? Bai Xinyan was about to speak when she suddenly froze. Yuchuanningjie had more or less the same reaction. This was because at this moment, the two of them received the same message from different channels. Tonight's operation is suspended. At this moment, the mimicry image underwent another round of refreshes. In the mind's sea, the extremely dark roots were clearly fading away quickly. After a few rounds of refreshes, they disappeared without a trace. Your Majesty. Yuchuanningjie subconsciously called out, but he didn't receive any response. When he looked at the projection area again, the bright stripe disappeared once more. Yuchuanningjie looked at Bai Xinyan again. The latter was still in a daze, clearly receiving information from other channels. He was a little anxious, but he had to hold it in. After a while, Bai Xinyan curled her lips again. What a terrible experience. What? When you're cooking soup, you discover someone stirring your soup. This is probably what it feels like. Yuchuanningjie could guess. The key was the following information. Who is it? Currently, I can only see the soup swirling, but I can't find the stirring spoon. This is a magic trick. Perhaps it's a chance encounter, perhaps it's a prank, or perhaps it's a targeted attack. Regardless, this is a problem at the level of an extraordinary. With Pope Hayaki's cautiousness, it would be difficult for him to take any new actions before he figured it out. After all, there are secrets here that cannot be exposed. Chapter 801. I have many little secrets, little secrets. I have many little secrets, little secrets. I'm not telling you, I'm not telling you, the ancient nursery rhyme swayed in the clouds. It was out of tune, unscrupulous, and carried a little hoarseness and difficulty of the voice-changing period. However, when it spread far away, the lingering sound turned into muffled thunder, overlapping and humming. The empty clouds actually had the reverberation effect of singing karaoke. Luo Nan, who was singing the nursery rhyme loudly, was still leaping up and down amidst the clouds. He somersaulted several times in a row. He had the momentum of wreaking havoc in the heavens. Only when it was tired of tossing and turning did it spread its limbs and float freely in the depths of the clouds. At this moment, the sun above his head was also releasing its restless pressure in the form of light and heat. Luo Nan half closed his eyes and felt the slight warmth on his face. His mind calmed down a bit, and he felt that his actions were preposterous. He felt that it was even more laughable. He really did laugh out loud, laughing until he was out of breath. In the end, he let out a howl of, ah, ah, ah. It wasn't until he roared out the last bit of air in his lungs that his body curled up, his face flushed red, and tears flowed from the corners of his eyes that he finally stopped. He returned to his sprawled state and gasped for breath. Luo Nan no longer had any misgivings. The people who could obstruct him were all dead. The cloud world had finally returned to his control. This was supposed to be his, because this was a magical world discovered by his mother and father. Luo Nan adhered to this logic. Because of this, Luo Nan's heart was weighed down by a rock when Gong Qi was here. He needed to be careful and hide here and there. Now that Gong Qi was thoroughly dead, Luo Nan's stifled heart rumbled and swelled, rolling up 1,000 emotions. He no longer had a reason to restrain himself. However, this place was too deserted. He did not receive any response. Would it be the same in the future? He followed the clues of his parents and stepped into one realm after another. He thought that he could touch more of their aura, but when he overcame all the difficulties and was moved by his family's rapid improvement, his rationality reflected the reality around him. In the end, it was just a mass of clouds and emptiness. Luo Nan's eyelids drooped down a bit more. But even so, a bright red glow still pressed in between his half-lidded eyelashes. The stimulating hue was like a dark flame smothered under new charcoal. It quietly devoured the fuel that had just been added amidst the fine crackling sounds. His heart was not at peace. Even though he had just gotten out of his stressful job and vented his frustrations in this boundless world of clouds, the flames in his heart were still burning. Luo Nan opened his eyes once more. His pupils constricted as he stared at the great wheel of the sun within the layer of clouds and the special environment of the void. The great wheel of the sun appeared slightly distorted. Speaking of which, the emotions that had just been accumulated, released, and then reignited were closely related to the toy above his head. Looking at it for too long wouldn't hurt the eyes, but it would burn the heart. Luo Nan was unable to remain calm, but he was able to maintain a calm mind. Soon, he made a decision. Well, since my condition isn't good, I'll take a break for now. Speaking of which, how long had it been since he'd last slept since he'd carried out the plan to kill Gong Qi? 70 hours? 80 hours? Go to sleep, maybe you will have a good dream that you don't want to wake up from. These thoughts flashed through Luo Nan's mind twice before he closed his eyes and soon fell asleep. Luo Nan's body lost control of his consciousness during his deep sleep. He naturally sunk, but he only sunk a few meters before he seemed to lose his proper weight. He rose up amidst the whistling astral winds, but he didn't appear to be light as a feather. Instead, there were multiple forces acting on him. He came and went, swaying and swaying, forming a kind of basic dynamic equilibrium. Time slowly passed, but there was no difference between day and night in the cloud world. The position of the great wheel of the sun in the deep sky didn't change. Only the turbulent flow of the clouds transformed into a myriad of shapes. Over time, it became monotonous. The environment of the cloud world seemed to be this monotonous forever, but there were always a few variables in between. After a period of time, a red shadow suddenly flew over near the area where Luo Nan slept peacefully. It was a mushed-mouth ape. Outsiders aside, this was the only living species that could be seen in the cloud world. It had an enormous body that was over 7 meters tall, and it was wrapped in layers of scales and muscles. It was as if its brain had been hollowed out, and its deep red pupils swiveled on its sunken head. It was separated by a distance of several thousand meters, yet it was still able to quickly lock onto a target drifting up and down in the depths of the clouds. The prey was confirmed. Saliva flowed from the area of the mushed-mouth ape's mouth and nose. The multiple signals coming from the body of the prey stimulated the appetite of the mushed-mouth ape. The mushed-mouth ape paused for a moment high up in the distance under the urge of its desire. Then it accelerated with a rumble, diving down towards Luo Nan's location. The distance of several thousand meters shrank by over 90% in the blink of an eye. Luo Nan's eyes were still closed, and his breathing was long and even. He was in a state of deep sleep, seeming to be completely unaware of the crisis and changes occurring in the outside world. And at this time, the surrounding clouds stirred slightly. Rays of light refracted, and it was as if a bubble had burst. Rui Wen's slender figure came out from within. She turned from incorporeal to solid, blocking between Luo Nan and the mushed-mouth ape. Just from visual effects alone, Rui Wen and the mushed-mouth ape had an enormous difference in body size. However, she was calm and silent from the inside out. She allowed the astral winds at high altitudes to blow at her school uniform skirt that reached her knees. She only used her gaze to lock onto the oncoming vicious creature. The surrounding clouds and the void suddenly dimmed. Rui Wen's eyes moved slightly, but she still hadn't made any substantial movements. The changes occurred on the level of light perception and color. It was a bit like the clouds were blocking the sun, covering it with a layer of shadow. But to be more precise, it was more like the dark gray color had seeped in, confusing the primary colors and messing up the foundation. There was a limit to this round of changes. Rui Wen and Luo Nan's positions practically didn't change at all. Compared to the changing environment of the void, their positions appeared exceptionally bright. The malevolent body of the mushed-mouth ape that was pouncing over seemed to be completely soaked in the dark gray color. There wasn't a single corner that was able to escape unscathed, both inside and out. The reason why Luo Nan felt this way was because the body of the mushed-mouth ape was turning transparent from Rui Wen's point of view. It was distorting and growing, and the degree of distortion was growing greater and greater. At this moment, aside from the rushing clouds, there were only empty clouds. It was as if an invisible yet terrifying maelstrom was embedded within. An enormous tearing force existed within the maelstrom, as well as a magical power that could erase reality. When everything was normal before, the physical distance between the mushed-mouth ape and Rui Wen was around 30 to 40 meters at most. With its speed, it could collide with Rui Wen in the blink of an eye. But when the void underwent a change, this distance of 30 to 40 meters became an insurmountable moat. It could isolate anyone who tried to cross it, and it could even devour them cleanly. The mushed-mouth ape let out a hiss from its mouth. The sound waves deformed within the distorted void, intermittently. Sometimes it was sharp and ear-piercing, sometimes it was muffled and dull. Sometimes it seemed to draw near, and sometimes it seemed to be far beyond the heavens. Rui Wen, who had recently been studying music, was able to imagine the complex physical environment that caused this series of changes. And all of this happened in the empty clouds. It could only be said that the person behind her had caused the surrounding world to become abnormal. Rui Wen made a rare comparison with common sense, but her thoughts soon vanished like smoke in thin air. This was because Luo Nan let out a long sigh at this time, waking up from his sleep. His own breathing seemed to be affected by the abnormal world around him. It was as muffled as thunder. The mushed-mouth ape, which had already been distorted beyond recognition, suddenly disintegrated amidst the sound of thunder. It transformed into a mass of steaming ash-gray smoke, which was engulfed by the clouds high in the sky. It then dissipated without a trace. Rui Wen. Skipped class? School's over. Really? There's no sun or moon in the clouds. Luo Nan's sunwell hovered above his head as he vaguely spoke words that lacked sincerity. His consciousness was still not completely awake. It was as if his body was situated in a gravity-free environment. He did a roll high in the air, somewhat clumsily switching to a half-sitting, half-standing posture. A gale just so happened to attack from high up in the sky at this time. The surging clouds and the young girl's pleated skirt rose and fell in a rhythmic manner. The surrounding gray background perfectly reflected a section of snow-white skin. One could feel the exquisite texture even with the naked eye. Hiss. There's a problem with the angle. Huh. Luo Nan's body actually broke out in a thin layer of cold sweat under the gaze of Rui Wen's clear and cold eyes. He subconsciously grinned and revealed a smile. I'm saying that the coupling between me and multiple spacetimes isn't too perfect. It's like the gears have gone astray. I need to constantly adjust them. You didn't scare me just now, right? Luo Nan locked gazes with Rui Wen after he finished speaking. He knew that he had said something stupid. Did this little girl have the concept of fear in her heart? Okay, I'm saying thank you for your help. But right now you still need to prioritize your studies. Don't split your thoughts too much with me. What if you suddenly disappear in school? I'm afraid that a lot of people will have headaches. Rui Wen lowered her head. She was quiet and obedient. This made Luo Nan feel even more embarrassed. The feeling of loneliness and heartburn he felt before he went to sleep had unknowingly been washed away. He subconsciously reached out his hand to touch Rui Wen's head. But during this process, he heard the muscles and joints of his body emit strange creaking sounds. Something was wrong. Luo Nan was already used to this sight. See? Every time I find my balance, I have to break it up and start over with a bit of external stimulation. There's basically no problem with the God gear aspect. Only the body gear is involved in the fundamental physical restrictions. It's simply impossible to adjust it to the right place in one go. Also, the coupled spacetime environment is like being covered with several thick blankets. Especially the misty labyrinth. There's no blanket at all. It's the type where fluff and cotton fly everywhere. Every time it shakes, it's especially hard to clean up. Luo Nan chattered endlessly. He mainly talked about how he integrated the laws of the misty labyrinth and even the spacetime laws of Earth through his own family's large coordinate system before and after he killed Gong Qi. He also talked about the Blood Soul Temple domain and other small plugins to construct the Luo clan domain. As for the unlucky mushed-mouth ape from before, it simply wasn't worth discussing. With the current construction of this domain, digesting Gong Qi's gambling capital shouldn't be a problem. The most important thing is to constantly adjust and deal with the various bumps in the integration process. Then again, the imbalance between body and soul is an old problem. This core problem isn't something that can be solved in a short time. It's fine to just walk. Right now, the most important thing is to explore and discover. Come. Let's talk inside. Humph. I don't need your help right now. As they spoke, the gray void in front of the two melted and caved in, revealing a gap in the door that could accommodate two people entering at the same time. Look. This Luo clan sandwich domain of mine is basically able to perfectly fulfill the function of a transfer station. Luo Nan relied on the mutual interference and influence of his own structure and the various spacetime environments. He didn't need Rui Wen's help to easily open a passage to the misty labyrinth. There's no problem on Earth either. It's just that it's a bit troublesome to regulate and adjust afterwards. Fortunately, the cloud world has a special nature. The rules aren't strict enough. Rui Wen didn't say anything. She allowed Luo Nan to hold her shoulders as they stepped through the door. They saw the misty labyrinth once more. It was no longer a scene of sand and dust wreaking havoc. At the very least, the area in front of them was like this. What assaulted their faces was a mist like morning mist. It inherited the grayish-white hue of the Luo clan sandwich domain, and it was even thicker. A twisted shadow faintly appeared in front of them. At first glance, it looked as sinister and terrifying as a dancing ghost. TSK. It's gotten dirty again. Luo Nan blew a breath of air as he spoke. A gale swept forth, and the mist that filled the air dissipated completely in the span of a breath. Luo Nan explained, every time I fine-tune it, this place becomes a pile of chicken feathers. There's nothing I can do about it. The fragmented laws of the labyrinth permeate everywhere. In addition to my sandwich domain, this is the only place where large-scale adjustments can be made. It's like a bearing. No, it's simply lubricating oil. There's no stable form to speak of. Wherever there's something wrong, I'll pour a jug of it. Rui Wen smiled faintly. She could roughly feel the humor that Luo Nan deliberately stirred up. She didn't speak. She just looked at the enormous object that appeared in the central region after the mist dissipated. The shape and silhouette over there clearly had the appearance of a large tree, and it was the kind that was withered. A withered tree? Rui Wen was far too familiar with this. She went to Gear on the north bank every day and looked at the sandbar across the lake. There was a withered tree like this. It stood all alone above the lake, and it hid the secrets of Luo Nan's parents. You've recovered quite well, right? Luo Nan led Rui Wen over to the withered tree. Rui Wen was a bit cautious as she walked within the large hall. This was because there were far too many details within this special space for her. Every inch of movement seemed to touch fine and densely woven spider silk, but she couldn't see the actual object. It felt weird. However, she was able to sense that this place had a more realistic feeling than before. The so-called large hall was originally a trap set up for Gong Qi. It was piled up from the fragments of the misty maze. If it was said that this place was just an enclosed piece of land back then a rough house had been constructed at the very least. Luo Nan was quite satisfied with this rough house right now. This place is equivalent to a multi-purpose hall. It can be used as a reception room, an activity area, a laboratory. Yeah, it still doesn't meet the requirements to support the operation of the instruments. Of course, the simplest way is to use it as a battlefield, but I'm a bit reluctant to do so. It was probably because of the tree hole. Rui Wen's gaze focused on the strange object in the shape of a withered tree in front of her. Looking at it from a close distance, there were still some differences between this toy and the real thing. It couldn't be considered lifelike. However, everything here was pieced together from fragmented configuration fragments. It was tens of millions of times more complex than mosaics and building blocks. It was an extraordinary large project, and all of this had been constructed within a short few dozen hours. Luo Nan was much more calm and brilliant in this domain. Come, let's go in and take a look. The function is the most important thing. Luo Nan clearly had the intention of showing off. He knocked on the outer bark of the withered tree, and just like when they entered the misty maze, a door that could accommodate two people side by side opened up. It quietly waited for them to enter. Rui Wen had entered the tree hole quite a few times in this space and time. However, she had entered through the passageway at the bottom of the lake in Gear's building. It was quite refreshing to directly pass through the tree trunk. This also reminded her that this place was quite different from the real withered tree. The judgment she just made became a bit fuzzy after entering the first floor. The first floor was the layout of the lounge. Under the dusky light, the narrow and exquisite layout was practically perfectly reproduced before her eyes. For a second, Rui Wen nearly believed that Luo Nan had brought her back through the barrier of space and time, returning to the tree hole of the withered tree sandbar. These are just decorations. If it were truly completed, then it wouldn't look like this. Luo Nan reached out to touch the inner wall of the tree hole, and waves of ripples actually appeared. The current functional construction is mainly concentrated on the upper level. Come come come. Big brother will show you something new. Rui Wen followed Luo Nan up. She had just taken a few steps, but she had yet to truly enter the second floor when a change suddenly occurred in her 5 senses and 6 senses. Rui Wen blinked her eyes. It was as if she had accidentally fallen into a starry sky. The surroundings were gloomy and deep. Hundreds of thousands of cold stars were sparsely arranged. Her sense of distance in space became a bit fuzzy. She subconsciously took another step before she could find her true senses. When she calmed her mind, she no longer felt like she had sunk into the starry sky. She only felt that it was a sensory effect similar to virtual reality. Her gaze quickly focused and locked onto the most conspicuous region in the center of this starry sky. The light there was the brightest, but it was more reserved. There were light regions and dark spots. There was a relatively smooth outline, and there was even a bit of a slightly diffused halo. At first glance, it looked like an astronomical scene that had undergone post-processing. It represented a distant and enormous galaxy. "Come here. Look carefully." Luo Nan called Roy Wen forward. The feeling it gave off changed when she looked at it from a different angle. It transformed into a translucent substance that was even smaller than the palm of her hand. It possessed a distinct texture. "This is the core work area. As for this little thing, it's my latest work. Currently, I'll call it lens." Roy Wen drew closer. She was quite interested in this so-called lens. Well, Luo Nan attached great importance to this matter. Of course she had to pay close attention to it. Upon careful observation, this little toy really did have the meaning of a lens. At the very least, it was quite similar to the teaching aids that teachers brought to physics classes. Aside from its transparency. Then, was it a concave lens or a convex lens? Luo Nan wasn't in a hurry to explain the marvels of the lens to Roy Wen. Instead, he extended his hand and streaked across the surrounding gloomy region. His fingertips seemed to stir the specks of light of the stars that blurry perception of distance. A smile blossomed on his face, becoming more and more splendid. "Roy Wen. Did you know? This is the true face of the hollow tree. It's something that I built according to Mom and Dad's design. The hollow tree vehicle at the end of the corridor in Grandpa's laboratory in the wilderness can only be considered an embryonic form. It's far behind this version. After all, this is the result of my father's many years of dedicated research after returning from the wilderness." "Hey. Have I mentioned this matter before?" Roy Wen shook her head slightly. I must have been too busy a few days ago. I forgot to tell you. Let me tell you. There's also Jerry's scenes here. It's super complicated." Luo Nan entered into nagging mode. He talked about whatever came to mind. It was just as he said. The matter itself was very complicated. It had experienced a long period of time, and space had jumped frequently. Some of it was still conjecture. The logic was rather chaotic when it was expressed. It was quite laborious to listen to. But Roy Wen only needed to understand that Luo Nan's mood was better than before. His mood was more positive. This was enough for her. "So, that old man of mine made this arrangement. He made it too complicated. I still don't understand the twists and turns inside. But no matter how you look at it, I'm lucky. The withered tree sandbar, formatting theory, configuration knowledge, and Jerry's database. All of these conditions were put together. They really pieced together a result, and in the end, it was passed into my hands. Maybe this is fate?" Roy Wen met Luo Nan's gaze and gave a light, "Yep." She felt that this should be the answer Luo Nan wanted to hear the most. Sure enough, Luo Nan revealed a smile again. He extended his hand to rub Roy Wen's head, temporarily ending this topic. "I'll investigate and straighten out the situation inside later. Let's first look at the most practical." The information he left behind was extremely practical and extremely crucial. I've talked about that 100-year sequence question bank before, right? It's good stuff. And it's the basic level of general education. Roy Wen, you also need to learn it. It's far more advanced than what is taught in school. Right now I firmly believe that a highly developed civilization system certainly exists in the distant starry sky beyond Earth. It has already established an intersection with us, and the possibility of further intercommunication will continue to increase in the future. If such a day truly comes, we can learn and understand its information ahead of time. We can be a step ahead of others and seize the initiative. Luo Nan adopted the posture of a parent lecturing, and Ruowen nodded obediently. She cooperated extremely well. The content inside should be extremely large and complex. It involves all aspects of society's construction, but there's also an inexplicable seal. It's very unpleasant. Luckily, it seems to be gradually unlocking right now. When I did the questions before, there was only the content of configuration theory. But I've secretly unlocked the knowledge of creation in the past 2 days. I've looked at some of it, and it's extremely useful. As for why it's unlocked, I suspect that it's directly related to this. Luo Nan pointed at the lens in the middle of the work area and winked at Ruowen. How about it? Do you want to give it a try first? Huh. This toy is just a half-finished product, but it's extremely interesting. I can't explain the specifics in a short amount of time. You can come over and give it a try. It's very interesting. Really? Right now Luo Nan looked like a little kid who couldn't wait to recommend his favorite games and toys to his friends. He hated that he couldn't blow the lens to the skies. There were many words that Ruowen didn't quite understand, but she absolutely wouldn't refuse his request. Ruowen leaned her upper body forward once more, closing the distance between her and the lens. She observed it seriously. However, she was still completely confused as to how to operate it. She tilted her head and cast an inquiring gaze at Luo Nan. Luo Nan laughed. Wait for me to teach you. It's actually very simple. Your sensing ability is this good. You just need to concentrate. There's a lot of interesting information within this little thing. It's true that it's a bit hard to understand, but I can explain it to you at any time. Ruowen hesitated for a few seconds. She was mainly trying to extract the true meaning of instructions from Luo Nan's words. She stared earnestly at the lens before her eyes. She looked beneath the translucent surface, at the endlessly flowing rays of light, as well as the faintly discernible patterns and dark spots. These were all in the midst of dynamic changes. She couldn't see any pattern for the time being. Luo Nan hurriedly corrected her. I don't use my eyes. I don't use my fleshly body's intuition. Oh, I can't completely break away from this. I need to use the synesthesia of my mental senses. My thoughts are that the collected information can be understood, categorized, and utilized by ordinary people. After all, the workload is too great. It would be even better if it could be converted into a code that can be recognized by machines. Luckily, Ruowen was able to understand his messy explanation in the end. She still didn't say a word. Her eyes stared at the lens, but what pierced through it was no longer her line of sight. Instead, it was her soul strength, which allowed her to perceive all things. The instant this power made contact with the lens, Ruowen practically instinctively utilized the technique of body and soul fusion. She searched for the special frequency of fluctuations of the marvelous creation before her eyes, forming a sufficient interference with it. In the blink of an eye, the light waves and shadows projected by the lens transformed into an incomparably rich and enormous flood of information. And it was still growing with an explosive momentum. Even with Ruowen's special state, she subconsciously furrowed her brows. Careful. Careful. Luo Nan also jumped in fright. He never expected that Ruowen's soul strength interference would be this efficient and direct. Her compatibility with the lens was top-notch. He was afraid that the little girl would be injured by the flood of information, so he hurriedly adjusted the flow of information from the side. Even at this time, Ruowen still turned her head and smiled at Luo Nan. Only then did she truly gather her mind and discern the core image within the flood of information. Luo Nan stared nervously. A dozen seconds passed before he finally couldn't help but ask, how is it? Is there anything that can be described? Conflict. Collision. Excellent. Luo Nan clapped his hands. That's it. Is there more? It's extremely dense. It's like rain, wind, and water droplets colliding together. Yes, yes, yes. Continue. Continue. There should be 2 directions. 2 kinds of power. They mix together, intensely clashing. They ceaselessly strive to eject things, but they're also absorbing. Luo Nan suddenly stopped talking. It was also at this time that Roy Wen saw a series of changes occur to the lens, which was in full interference with her soul strength. The edges of the originally clear silhouette blurred. There was a clear tendency towards granulation as a whole. It was as if a layer of frosted sand had been added to it. At first glance, it looked more like a mass of glistening nebula. And the structure of this mass of nebula became unstable. It was restless. There seemed to be a continuous explosion of conflict within it, so it swayed irregularly. It didn't have a clear direction of rotation. Yes, the lens was changing, and it was a corresponding change that occurred with Roy Wen's perception. It practically reproduced the scene that she described perfectly. Don't be affected. Continue. Luo Nan commanded. Roy Wen was a bit startled. Then she closed her eyes, unaffected by the changes in the lens. She used pure soul strength to sense and restore the image contained within the flood of information. Soon, she captured a crucial point: two kinds of power are in the center. They dominate everything. They are also converging. Aside from collision, there is also a kind of resonant pulsation. Roy Wen recalled an observation experiment from a biology class not too long ago. She found a ready-made example. It's like a pregnant rabbit. The heartbeat of the fetus. Luo Nan gasped in admiration. Perfect. Actually, Roy Wen still had a few opinions, but it was rather difficult for her to find the corresponding words to describe it. She stopped and opened her eyes once more. The lens no longer looked like a lens at all. It had completely transformed into the shape of a nebula. The center was shrunken, yet it was the brightest. The periphery was in the shape of dust and mist. It seemed that it wanted to pull out a few spiral arms, but it gave up because of its unstable state. Do you know what it corresponds to? The mist labyrinth. Roy Wen already understood. Yes. It's the reflection of the mist labyrinth. Of course, it's depicted by our perception. It's based on the signal waves that come from every corner of the mist labyrinth. They're collected by the tree hole, magnified, and gathered within the lens. Then we analyze, categorize, and reproduce them. Luo Nan faced Roy Wen and revealed a large grin. It's a very useful tool, right? Roy Wen nodded. Luo Nan snapped his fingers, and a projection of a double helix diagram appeared to one side of the lens nebula. Oh, this is the design blueprint of the tool. It's the key information left behind by my old man. Luo Nan enlarged the projection in a timely manner as he spoke. Now they could see that the structure was similar to the double helix of DNA. The nodes that connected the two long strands were absolutely not base pairs like ACTG. Instead, they were complex three-dimensional diagrams that were so complex and precise that it made one's eyes pop. Similarly, they were paired in pairs. They were linked to each other, displaying an extremely direct correspondence. These two chains. One is a collection of tool diagrams. The other is a collection of surveying and mapping drawings. Every version of the tool should be a version of surveying and mapping results. Every link represents a set of surveying and mapping experiments. I looked at the dates. The earliest one can be traced back to the year 75, and the last one stopped at the year 90, June. There have been several hundred iterations in 15 years, and there are over 2,000 sets of experiments altogether. What is this? Roy Wen was silent, and Luo Nan answered his own question: a treasure trove. A treasure trove of cognition. We can make adjustments according to the results of the experiments. We can see what the world we live in is like in the end. Luo Nan waved his hand heavily. In the central region, the structure of the lens nebula, which appeared to be rather regular, instantly warped. It was as if it had collided with a layer of barrier. In fact, there really was a faintly discernible arc of light that pressed against the edge of the lens nebula. There were even traces of a depression, forming a direct view of the scene of the collision. We are unable to describe the true structure of spacetime. We can only reduce the dimensions to deal with it. However, I think that it is already quite close to the truth. The relationship between the fog maze and the local spacetime of the Earth is probably like this. An intimate contact on the spacetime level. The shattered fog maze is sufficiently interfering with the spacetime of the Earth. Oh, there are also interference and friction fronts. As Luo Nan spoke, the outermost layer of the lens nebula lit up with a thin ring of light, the cloud world. Chapter 802. Perhaps it was because the director of the Environmental Affairs Office bowed and apologized from a more appropriate angle, even God was moved. At noon on May 6, a sudden torrential rain poured down, quickly washing away the atmospheric dust created by the fireworks of the music festival last night. Correspondingly, the Jade Lights sailing ceremony at the Saka cruise terminal had to end in a sorry state. The respectable gentlemen and ladies waving to each other on and off the boat quickly disappeared under the blooming umbrellas. The deep flute sounded, and the Jade Lights sailed out of the cruise ship dock. Lo stood in the crowd and controlled the information projection on her retina. It was a list of passengers on the Jadeite Light. He didn't find anything unusual on the list. If he had to nitpick, it would probably be that there weren't too many important people on the luxury cruise that had just left. In fact, among the people on the ship, there were not many who were qualified to participate in the high-level high seas auction in 10 days. A real big shot would never follow the rules of others. Just like the Lord she served. However, it was precisely this kind of person who truly dominated the course of events. The ceremony ended in a hurry. In the chaotic scene caused by the heavy rain, people could finally release their true emotions. Lo heard many sighs of relief. In her view, it wasn't only because the cruise had just left, but also because it was out of everyone's sight. At this moment, his wristband vibrated. Flight NH5753 has arrived. Lo also let out a long sigh and unknowingly blended into the surroundings. Emoya, who had been in a rush for 5 days, returned safely as the direct flight from Saka City to Sia City landed. At this point, Lee's 2 major missions in coming to Osaka City, finding Snake Tongue and protecting Emoya, could be considered to have been smoothly completed. Lo made a summary of her own work. He didn't play any key role, and his support position was still stable. Coupled with the departure of the Jade Light cruiser, the stormy Band City should be able to calm down for a while, right? That might not be the case. Over the past 2 days, even Lo, an outsider, had noticed the subtle and tense atmosphere in Band City. Compared to pure perception, some changes on the market level might be more convincing. His wristband vibrated continuously. He received a short message and an instant message almost at the same time. Lo carefully read the message before picking up the call. "Hello, Mr. Opin." The voice on the other side was cold and alienated. "Ms. The handover work with you is going very smoothly. At present, the yacht has sailed into the Ohori River. It is expected to arrive at Beishan Lake in an hour." "Yes, Mr. Opin. We have confirmed it." Lo slightly deviated from the direction of the crowd and approached the edge of the viewing platform. This was the highest point of the cruise ship dock. She could see that in the opposite direction of the Emerald Light that had just set sail, there was a small and exquisite private yacht going against the current along the man-made flood channel that had been dug after the war. The exterior of the yacht had the same design style as the Ray that had been docked for overhaul. They did indeed belong to the same manufacturer and the same production line, so they could be considered as sisters. Having such a yacht would allow Mr. Luo Nan to adapt to his living environment without any obstructions. Even if he didn't care about it. Being able to quickly find a substitute and successfully purchase it at an unexpectedly low price was mostly due to the treacherous atmosphere in Band City over the past 2 days. As the representative of the owner of the yacht, Mr. Opin took this money-losing business to heart. He wasn't in the mood to be polite at all. "I hope that you will follow the agreement and pay the final payment on time and accurately." "Okay, Mr. Opin. We will definitely pay all the relevant funds in strict accordance with your requirements. In fact, another payment has already been made." "Yes." Mr. Opin confirmed the change in the account, and his tone also subtly changed. A second passed before he spoke once more. Right now is the transaction window period. I hope that our cooperation can continue. Of course. The call was soon ended, but another message came in soon after. It was still from Mr. Opin. The message contained the coordinates of an address that didn't exist in the secular world, as well as the time. Enla smiled. Her gaze shifted away from the river and fell into the depths of the boundless curtain of rain. Just looking at this yacht transaction alone, it was nothing more than an exchange of luxury goods. It was purely an act of consumption. But as a qualified businesswoman, Enlo also made full use of the other conveniences brought about by the transaction. For example, information. Okira Rongsan was an important figure in the Great Zay Church, a local church in Ban City. The Great Zay Church had already existed before the Third World War, and it was a rare veteran that could be revitalized in the era of distortion. In the span of a few decades, it had changed from a simple faith group to a mysterious church that could produce supernatural powers. In the tangled and complicated territory of Ban City, they had their own faction of power. Dealing with such an old-school church, especially when it came to matters involving the transfer of large amounts of funds abroad, could often reveal a lot of interesting things. During the transfer process of the yacht, the Great Zay Church behind Okira Rongsan had indeed given a large discount and reduced the transfer fee. And most of the discounts were lost in the secret circulation of funds. In other words, in addition to money, the Great Zay Church also needed to use Enli's financial channels. Moreover, they also made some hints, asking Enlo if she wanted to take over some of the real estate by Beishan Lake. Even some special materials that weren't easy to transport. This was simply the standard mode of quickly liquidating assets and the escape of important figures. During the transaction negotiations, Enlo also heard some subtle rumors from various relevant channels. Some were evidence, and some were counterexamples that needed further analysis. But no matter what, it was better than nothing. Without a considerable transaction as a starting point, she wouldn't be able to fight her way into this closed ecosystem. And now, the information in Ban City could be compared with T City, Xia City, and even Chan City. She could dig out a lot of sensitive information from them. A part of it was directly related to the Amaterasu Church. Enla had personally witnessed a series of battles of wits and courage in a certain laboratory with Luo Nan's support. Of course, she understood what Luo Nan was concerned about. Mr. Luo Nan would be interested in these things. After finishing her work at the dock, Enla turned around and blended into the crowd. Soon, she entered the parking lot of the port. Just as she got into the car, her wristband vibrated again and automatically switched to the internal channel of the Great Zay Church. These mercenaries from T City really can't be trusted. When things come to a head, each and every one of them is indecisive. No, they've always been staring at the money. They have no fear for the blood flame will. Yes, yes. Old Jiang, you're right. Especially that Cadman. He's the root of the prisoners and has the temperament of a fox. When the first Ablatum was around, he was extremely good. But now that he's in seclusion, he's greedy to no end. He's fiddling with the T-City branch to the point where it's leaking air everywhere. He's infiltrating everywhere into a sieve. He's clearly using the capital of the Great Zay Church to do that extracorporeal circulation. Shouldn't we deal with this kind of person early on? Shouldn't we just wait for him to bite us in the back? Enla signaled the driver to go back. Then, she closed the rear compartment and responded warmly, "Old Jiang, don't get angry. Don't get angry and harm your body. My body is very hard. Even if he really bites me, he'll break all his teeth. But the key right now is the backbone." Recently, the first Ablatum has been paying less and less attention to mundane matters. I know she's brooding over the matter in Xia City, but when it comes to hard power, we can't compare. This isn't something that can be made up for in a year or two. Jiang Yuanjin chattered for nearly 10 minutes before hanging up. Enla shook her head and used her knuckles to scrape the space between her eyebrows. She let out a long sigh, but the breath she exhaled wasn't able to unfurl the lines between her eyebrows. Compared to the smooth progress in Ban City, the situation in D City's headquarters wasn't optimistic. The Blood Flame Order had just moved not too long ago. Their foundation was still shallow. They were surrounded by wolves, like tigers eyeing their prey. On the surface, the call just now was Jiang Yuanjin's old pedant complaining. But in reality, he was transmitting information. He had also misled them regarding the possible eavesdropping. The person Jiang Yuanjin spoke of was Cadman. He was the local representative of the Order's power in D City. Perhaps he was just a snake in a rat at the moment, but as long as this local snake was around, there was always the worry of an unforeseen event that would lead a wolf into the house. Currently, Chan City was leading a global, major investigation operation. This gave Cadman an excellent opportunity. During the sensitive period of time that may involve despicable murder, the Blood Flame Order's solidified configuration in the Abyss region, the Blood Soul Temple, was indeed in a highly active state. Naturally, the Blood Flame Order was included in the pending investigation list. If you want to incriminate someone, you can always find a pretext. What's more, this side wasn't necessarily innocent. Yes, the major investigation operation in Ban City also gave some people an excuse to use force. It felt like these few sides really had a tacit understanding. Yin sighed again and leaned back. Every time she faced this kind of problem, she had no choice but to admit that she still couldn't be considered someone who could take charge of an area by herself. Just thinking about it made her feel mentally and physically exhausted. From the most realistic point of view, this wasn't the level and problem she should be thinking about. At times like this, she especially missed Mrs. Halder and the young boss she had just attached herself to. If those two were here, what would her job be? Feeding the fish? Yin shook her head. She took out a small ornament-like crystal ball from a secret pocket she kept close to her body. She gently and carefully rubbed it in the center of her palm, feeling the indescribably subtle tactile sensation. The inside of the crystal ball seemed to be sealed with a cloud of smoke. It also seemed like a turbid liquid. It was ash gray in color. And there was a flat living creature swimming back and forth within it. It was the devil ray that Luo Nan had tamed. This mutant possessed a terrifying killing range in Luo Nan's hands, but right now it was like a pure plaything. She couldn't see any threat from it. Being able to control this existence, at least temporarily, gave Yin Lu an enormous sense of satisfaction and stability. It was also through this method that she could truly feel the existence of the backbone. No matter what, as long as she was able to attach herself to Luo Nan, who could easily create such miracles, then she and the Blood Flame Order would have a bright future. Yin Lu raised the crystal ball in front of her eyes and observed it seriously. She followed Luo Nan's arrangements and grazed the Devil Ray twice in the past 2 days. The Devil Ray's appetite was great, and it was very obedient. But for some unknown reason, the colorless and transparent filler inside grew more and more turbid. It constantly switched between a gaseous state and a liquid state. The change was extremely obvious. She remembered that her teacher had said that the crystal ball was just a speculum. The Devil Ray's true sealed location was within a spatial fault. What did this change foretell? Yin Lu was puzzled no matter how she thought about it. Her thoughts drifted back and forth. Plus, she hadn't rested well recently. Her mind was exhausted, and she actually fell asleep in the back seat of the car. And then she had a dream. In the dream, Yin Li's consciousness arrived at the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss district. She maintained a subtle state of half-consciousness. She had a bit of independent thought, so much so that she couldn't determine whether this was a pure dream or a cultivation instinct brought about by her decades of life as a priest. Yin Lu only knew that her consciousness was floating in the lava lake of the stone forest at the lowest level of the Blood Soul Temple structure. She was at a loss, not knowing where to go. Suddenly, a cluster of light appeared. The outline of the light was like the crystal ball she was playing with in her hand. It emitted a bright and precious light, becoming the most eye-catching existence in the turbid and chaotic lava lake. Yin Li's consciousness couldn't help but shift over. She was pulled by the light source and coiled a few times. She vaguely felt that it wasn't some sort of crystal ball, but a mirror. Her image was reflected on the mirror, but it wasn't too realistic. It was a bit like the effect of a haha mirror. Her habitual image was warped under the irregular refraction and focus of light. But where did this physical effect come from? After another bout of confusion, Enlu suddenly had a different feeling. At this moment, what attracted her spirit was neither a crystal ball nor a mirror, but a clear and sharp eye that was staring at her coldly. The eye pierced through all her disguises, tore apart her usual image, and recorded only the most essential elements of her into her mind. She didn't even know what some of the elements gathered in it were. Enlu instinctively wanted to avoid it, but she couldn't help but want to see the result of the reflection. After hesitating for a while, she finally made eye contact, only to find that too much information had been recorded in the mysterious eye. Not only her, but also the stone forest, the lava lake, and the surging emotions, as well as the detailed composition of desires in the lava. If it was extended further, perhaps the structure of the entire Blood Soul Temple and even the hearts of the entire Blood Flame Order were also recorded. Everything formed a complicated yet distinct structure, which was then condensed into an insignificant spot of light in the mysterious eye. Like a star in the hazy night sky, it melted into an even more immeasurable universe. It had a real meaning of existence, but that was all. As for Enlu, she was merely an insignificant speck of dust on this star. She didn't even have the value of special attention. Grandeur and insignificance. Loftiness and lowliness. The intense contrast that touched her body and mind instantly clutched Enlu's heart, giving her a shock that was hard to endure. It also caused her to suddenly wake up. The crystal ball that sealed the devil ray was still in her hand. She couldn't tell if it was cool or hot. She couldn't find an accurate word to describe it, but it was able to calm her mind. It shouldn't be a dream, right? As an ability user, Enlu believed that such a clear memory couldn't be a dream without reason. She wanted to believe that it was some sort of revelation. Perhaps it was related to Mr. Luonan? She raised the crystal ball once more, confirming that the devil ray inside was in good condition. Enlu carefully put it away a moment later. She looked at her watch and looked out the window. The car had just gotten off the high-speed magnetic rail. It was gradually lowering the level of traffic, so its field of vision was quite wide. Through the curtain of rain outside the window, one could see the outline of the southern shore of Northern Mountain Lake. A large part of the reason for this was that the surface of the lake had been painted with the color of cheap plastic. These were the simple raincoats worn by the music fans who braved the rain to participate in the event. The sudden rain brought quite a bit of trouble to the recently opened Band City Music Festival. Then again, perhaps the music fans who were able to explode in joy under the curtain of rain would prefer a similar atmosphere. The sense of reality diluted the dreamy feeling, and Enlu subconsciously let out a breath. A few minutes later, the car stopped outside the pier on the southern shore of Northern Mountain Lake. A fishing boat was parked there, serving as a transfer boat. It carried her to meet up with the newly purchased yacht. Later on, she would go to a specific area on the lake to do a preliminary inspection. She would make preparations for the upcoming deal with the Great Zay Order. Basically, she wouldn't spend any more money, but she had to gather information. She had to put on a show. After the car came to a stop, the driver in the front seat picked up the umbrella in the car. He jogged over to open the door for Enlu in the rain. In this world, the sense of service of the lower-class people was always on point. Enlu believed that this was something she could learn from. Especially since there was a competitor of the same kind who was born here right now, appearing by Mr. Luonan's side, there would be trouble in the future. Enlu got off the car in an elegant manner. Her heels stepped on the water film that had accumulated on the surface of the road. A cool breeze wrapped in the smell of water blew over, bringing with it the fragrance of vegetation. She subconsciously raised her eyes to look into the distance. She cast her gaze at the huge camphor tree behind the boundless curtain of water. Even though they were separated by nearly a kilometer, Mr. Jordan was still the most eye-catching landmark on the southern shore of Northern Mountain Lake. Aside from it, it would be very difficult for people's gazes to be attracted by other targets. However, just a second later, Enlu's line of sight shifted to a different angle. She looked in that direction, but it was not a target belonging to the Jorge. Thanks to the sharp senses of an ability user, even though they were separated by a kilometer, she was still able to grasp the most crucial element. Enla patted the car window, indicating the driver to return to his original position. Go forward. Go under the tree. The driver revealed an awkward expression. Boss Ian, there are roadblocks and warnings up ahead because of the music festival. Motor vehicles are prohibited. Enla didn't wait for the driver to finish speaking. She snatched the black umbrella from the driver's hand. She blocked the falling rain from above and quickly walked forward. The distance of a kilometer from the embankment pier to the camphor tree was only around 200 seconds, even though she intentionally restrained herself. Outsiders felt that this elegant and stylish office beauty was truly well-trained. She was able to walk like the wind even though she wore 10-centimeter high heels. However, they didn't know that Enla was afraid of neglecting an important person. She didn't know that she was afraid of neglecting an important person in broad daylight. Her heart was extremely conflicted. She arrived under the tree with great difficulty. She was an ability user, but her legs actually went slightly soft. She didn't care about the state of her body. She directly faced the young man who was looking up at the tree and bowed down. She greeted respectfully. Sir, you've returned. The young man under the tree was undoubtedly Luonan. Actually, he had made a few modifications to his face. There was a clear difference from his original appearance, but Enlu was able to recognize him with a single glance. The reason was very simple. Luonan had an ancient-styled bamboo umbrella on top of his head, shielding him from the wind and rain. The person holding the umbrella was none other than Snake Tongue in kimono. The formal kimono of Sakura City women weren't suitable for traveling in the rain. A single misstep would result in a sloppy and embarrassing appearance. It just so happened that this woman named Kitayama Yuehui was wearing a white kimono. Because she was holding an umbrella, her sleeves drooped down, revealing her jade-like arms. Even Enla couldn't help but take a few more glances. Snake Tongue smiled and bowed when she saw Enli's gaze move over. She was dignified and respectful, just like in the past. Who would have thought that she was actually a curse master with a fierce reputation in the inner world? But why did Mr. Luonan find this person first after returning? Enli's state of mind fluctuated a bit. This was because Luonan's behavior was a bit cold. He clearly heard the greeting, but the angle of his head and neck didn't change at all. His gaze was still patrolling the branches and leaves of the Zwajia guard gate. He only let out a grunt from his nostrils in response. Enla didn't dare to say anything when she saw this. It wasn't good to steal Snake Tongue's position either. She could only maintain a slightly bowed posture and quietly ponder and size him up. Luonan was still in the same attire he wore when he left the ship the day before yesterday. He wore a wide-brimmed hat on his head, and there was the support insignia of a certain band on it. He should have bought it recently, and his body was quite refreshing. The lush branches and leaves of the camphor tree had already blocked a portion of the rain. Snake Tongue's bamboo umbrella blocked a large portion of the rain. Even the drizzle that was blown over by the cool breeze from the lake was deflected to the side of his body, unable to touch his body in the slightest. It was as if there was an invisible barrier existing. It was quite miraculous. In addition, there was also. Today, Luonan was actually wearing glasses. Moreover, it was an extremely retro monocle. It was a monocle that practically no one used in reality. He wasn't like the characters in movies and TV shows, where the lens was clipped to his eye socket. The soft facial contours of Easterners weren't necessarily able to accomplish this. The lens was floating in the air. It was absolutely not a projection effect. There really was a mirror-like object stuck to Luonan's cheek, floating in front of his left eye. Enlu was walking in the other direction. She wasn't able to discover it immediately due to her angle. Special external equipment? Enlu subconsciously moved a step forward. Her angle changed, allowing her to see it more clearly. But at this moment, Enla didn't just notice the structure of the monocle. She also noticed the special texture, luster, and even the image that stabbed into her heart. It was very familiar. It was clearly her first time seeing it. Oh no. Enlu drew in a small breath. She suddenly understood that this was the mysterious eye that had appeared in her dreams. Luo Nan was using this eye to observe the Zhuo Jia Wei men at this time. Just like how he had seen through Enlu and the Blood Soul Temple, he directly attacked the core of the Zhuo Jia Wei men. Perhaps it was because of her first impression, but Enlu kept feeling that the enormous plant-type mutant before her eyes was shivering in the wind and rain. Luo Nan didn't do anything else aside from watching. He was like a foreign tourist who had come because of its fame. Under the guidance of the two beautiful tour guides, he lingered on the scenic spot for a bit. He sighed with emotion for a bit before finally leaving in a straightforward and efficient manner. Snake Tongue and Enlu glanced at each other. They fell a bit behind as they followed behind. This time, it was Enlu who was holding the umbrella to block the rain. The two women cooperated quite well. There was a young man dressed casually, a beautiful and capable office lady, and an elegant and dignified woman in a kimono. The three of them were quite eye-catching when they walked together. It was just that their attention wasn't placed on these minor details. Luo Nan turned his head halfway and spoke to Snake Tongue. The structure and design of your order is too crude. The imaginary configuration on the mental plane already has many flaws. The efficiency of entering the plane of reality is even worse. Yeah. When the order was established, it was just for the sake of a cover. Most of it was scraped together. It's too wasteful. I'm very sorry. From Enli's perspective, this conversation was a bit out of the blue. Luo Nan, who had been silent for 2 days, had suddenly appeared. Then, he studied the so-called structure of the myriad spirit order together with Snake Tongue. In the end, what was his intention? There's also your side. Ah, yes. Luo Nan suddenly turned his head, causing Enlu to instantly raise her attention by 120%. The Blood Soul Temple also has room for correction. The main thing is... Luo Nan spoke halfway through, but the floating monocle in front of him suddenly burst open with countless fine cracks. Some parts even burst forth with fine water droplets. The water droplets soon merged into the curtain of rain. If it weren't for the fact that Snake Tongue and Enlu were both ability users, they wouldn't have been able to see it. Judging from the material, the lens seemed to be condensed from water vapor. It was truly a magical technique. The shattered and warped lens blocked Luo Nan's eyes. It looked a bit ridiculous, but Enlu could see that this lens was clearly alive. At the very least, there was some sort of incorporeal power at work. Even though it was shattered, it continued to squirm. It seemed to want to recover to its complete state. Luo Nan furrowed his brows. In the end, he reached out with his hand and smoothed out the lens. However, there was still a relatively large hole in the center. Fine cracks could be seen on the periphery. In this way, the lens overlapped with Luo Nan's eyes. The black pupil just happened to be embedded in the hole in the center. Looking at it from the front, the eyes of a normal human suddenly turned into the cold vertical pupils of a viper. There was a kind of dizzying impact. Mister? Luo Nan rubbed the lens again, but he wasn't able to repair it a step further. He flattened his mouth in a bit of dissatisfaction and continued with his previous topic. The problem of the Blood Soul Temple is the same as my current problem. There's nothing wrong with the configuration design on the mental plane. But in order to perfectly reflect it in the material world, I need to find a compromise plan. This is especially true for complex designs. Otherwise, even if I can support it for a while, problems will arise sooner or later. Speaking of which, Dean Wan promised to teach me the art of creation. I wonder if he still remembers it. Enlu automatically ignored the last sentence. Her mind was completely led away by the phrase, problems will arise sooner or later. As the deputy first oblatum of the order, she couldn't be any clearer. In the early years, the foundational sacrificial vessel that reflected the structure of the Blood Soul Temple in the Abyss District followed Luo Nan's judgment. It collapsed from within. The internal strife of the order was just a natural extension of this matter. She unconsciously tightened her grip on the handle of the umbrella. When she spoke again, her throat was a bit tight. Can this problem be solved? It can be. In theory, it's possible. Luo Nan responded in an extremely relaxed manner. It can be compromised with material properties. It can also be changed. Of course, there should be suitable materials in the vast world, waiting for us to unearth them. These are no longer the thoughts of configuration. They belong to the domain of creation. The difference is like a thought experiment and a physical experiment. The core lies in the cost of reality. As for the cost, it's the cost of reality. First, it has to conform to reality. Then, it's the cost. I came back this time to understand the conditions of reality. I want to take the opportunity to do a few experiments. I need your help. We will follow your will. Sir, please instruct us. Yin Lu and Snake Tongue spoke at the same time to express their opinions. The two glanced at each other and revealed polite smiles. Luo Nan didn't pay attention to these small details. He spoke with his fingers. The experimental base requires all sorts of processing equipment and testing instruments. Oh, I have these ready-made, but I still need to replenish them. Moving and the like is quite troublesome. Raw materials. Large amounts of raw materials to choose from. From basic minerals to artificial compounds. There are also extraordinary materials in the direction of the mutant species. Yin Lu had already opened up her work area. She quickly recorded and filtered suitable items from the database at the same time. The experimental base was fine, but when she heard the need for raw materials, her eyes lit up. The Great Swamp Order seemed to be just right. There's also the experimental environment. The noise from the interference of space and time has been quite serious these past 2 days. Things haven't calmed down in Ban City yet? Yes. I was just about to report this to you, sir. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.